In Tennessee, prison nurse Jennifer Hyatt finally finds true love in a man behind bars.
Their eyes met, and she said, "I'm in love."
George had a very long and violent criminal history, but there was something exciting in him, and Jennifer fell under his spell.
Good morning, my baby doll. Good morning, baby.
And when the system tries to keep them apart, she is willing to break all the rules to be with her man.
George yells, "Shoot, shoot," and Jennifer begins firing.
Anything for them to be together, she was going to do. Maybe kill for him.
Go!
And later, after a difficult childhood on the streets of Chicago, Latasha Pulliam meets a man who fulfills her dark desires.
It's an unfortunate union. It appeared that Latasha and Dwight were using each other for benefits.
It was a case of torture and murder.
She was willing to go the extra mile for him and do whatever she needed to do, even kill.
From an early age, West Jordan, Utah native Jennifer Forsythe dreamed about falling in love and having the perfect relationship until she saw her own parents' union crumble.
Her parents divorced very early, and in many ways, she felt that perhaps it was her fault. We see this with many children. They blame themselves. It also causes self-esteem and self-worth issues.
Those feelings continue into her teen years as she goes from one dead-end relationship to another, consistently mending a broken heart.
Jennifer was drawn to men who would exert control. There were patterns of abuse, both physical abuse, sexual abuse, mixed in with bouts of substance abuse and alcohol abuse. Every relationship she had was set up for failure.
As she hits her 20s, she finds comfort working as a nurse's aide at a local hospital. But the joy she feels from helping others isn't enough to fill the hole in her heart.
Jennifer needed a man in order to give her a feeling of self-worth. By herself, she did not feel that she was worth much.
She gives marriage a shot, twice, but it isn't long before she finds herself in the singles club again.
Jennifer was very naive and very easily manipulated. I think maybe she was lonely at that point in her life.
So that winter, after visiting friends in Tennessee, the 31-year-old decides a change is in order. She pulls up stakes and makes the 1,500-mile move from West Jordan, Utah to Dyersburg, Tennessee, 3 hours west of Nashville. It's like a breath of fresh air.
This change of scenery was a way for her to erase her very negative past and now have a better future, especially when it came to being in a relationship with a man.
Right away, Jennifer focuses on her career and soon gets her nursing license. Her first job is at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. But she's not worried.
The Northwest Correctional Complex was a very low security type of prison. It's more about rehabilitation. This is not a scary place at all for Jennifer to work, but maybe even a very hopeful place.
There, she enjoys administering medications and overseeing many of the inmates' health issues. It's the last place she expects to find love. Then, just 2 weeks into the job, Jennifer's heart almost skips a beat when 33-year-old inmate George Hyatt is assigned to clean up the clinic where she spends most of her time.
George was a good-looking young man who was fit, who was charismatic. When she first saw George, their eyes locked across the room, and she knew that they were going to be together.
So desperate for love, she ignores the fact that he's only served 2 years of a 35-year sentence for a series of crimes going back more than 15 years.
Anybody who's committed 2 aggravated robberies, multiple burglaries, and escape, by definition, they're a dangerous person. Not someone you'd take to Sunday dinner.
But she doesn't care, especially when he gives her constant praise, telling her how beautiful she is.
And he knew what to say to make her feel good, to appreciate it, make her feel wanted. You know, had her thinking, hey, this guy's a good guy, even though he's in prison.
When George and Jennifer met, they were actually able to feed into each other's needs. George was extremely lonely for female company, and she had had all of these negative experiences in love. Here finally was someone who was willing to shower her with attention.
Jennifer can't get enough of the charismatic prisoner. She even thinks of little ways to make his life on the inside better.
She did things for him, lots of things, including some outside food, and he had a cell phone. And I think the cell phone came in a peanut butter jar.
She put her career on the line by kissing George, by holding hands with him, by being inseparable. She lost all focus. She lost all perspective. It was about this love affair that she was having. She didn't care about the consequences.
She hadn't had the job very long, and she was already willing to break the rules. That just shows how hard that Jennifer was falling for George, that she was willing to put her job on the line to try and take care of him or to bring him the things that he wanted.
Soon, the two profess their love to each other, and Jennifer has never felt so complete.
Me too.
She was deeply, madly in love with George. He makes me feel good. He makes me feel wanted. And I think maybe George had some love for her. But I also think George loved what she could do for him.
Unfortunately, their love affair is about to hit a serious stumbling block when she sneaks in something else for her man.
Jennifer had smuggled in food, shrimp, to George. She was caught in the prison with that, and it was contraband, and she was immediately fired for that infraction.
But the lovelorn nurse is not about to give up her soulmate. And when it seems like the entire world's trying to keep these lovers apart, they'll risk everything to be together.
She was willing to do anything for George, maybe even die for him.
She was under his spell, no question about it.
In Tiptonville, Tennessee, prison nurse Jennifer Forsythe has finally found love in convicted felon George Hyatt. But their secret affair is discovered when she's caught smuggling him some carry-out shrimp and is immediately fired and banned from the prison.
You can't have people sneaking in anything to prisoners. I mean, because today is shrimp, tomorrow is a clip to a 9mm.
Because of the violation, George is transferred to Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, 3 hours east, near Nashville. Jennifer is devastated but determined to keep their relationship alive.
Even though he was in prison for 35 years, maybe she thought there's a light at the end of the tunnel where one day we can be together.
After 6 months, she moves north to Hendersonville, just 25 miles from George. During the day, she works as a live-in nurse for an elderly couple. But at night, all she can do is dream of her lover.
You think that she would have learned her lesson, but no. She actually followed him to this other prison, moved into this town in order to now even step up and escalate that relationship. She's going to stand by him as he goes through his trials and tribulations.
Unfortunately, the move turns out to be in vain, since she can't visit her love in prison without being legally married, and her desperation grows.
They still communicated over the phone, but she didn't have any ability to have physical contact with George any longer.
To fix the problem, the two decide to tie the knot in a no-contact prison ceremony.
Husband and wife.
Even though there are no conjugal visits allowed, they'll take what they can get, filling the gaps between visits with long phone calls. Despite the maximum security, George is still able to use the cell phone he snuck in.
He would be on the phone with Jennifer every waking moment, and I mean that quite literally. She would talk to him 10, 11, 12 hours a day.
Hey. Good morning, my baby doll.
Good morning, baby. Wake you up. I'll call you back.
I love you.
But carrying on their love this way isn't enough for Jennifer, and she decides she can't wait 33 years to feel his touch.
She wanted her husband, George Hyatt, out of prison. She wanted him herself.
And with that, she knows there's only one way for the two to be together. She will help her man escape.
Because Jennifer was so in love with George, she didn't give any thoughts to the consequences. She just wanted to be with George, and hey, in order for us to be together, I have to get him out of prison.
George acts surprised, but it was something he was secretly hoping for from the start.
Whether he loved Jennifer or not is irrelevant, because George had been looking for the right dupe, the right person, the right victim to be able to break him out of jail.
You okay, babe?
That's when he comes up with the perfect plan. In just a few weeks, he has a court hearing for an outstanding robbery charge at the Rowan County Courthouse in Kingston, 2 hours away. He knows it's an ideal place to flee.
I think George knew that it wouldn't be hard to escape from the Rowan County Courthouse because, I mean, he had been there plenty of times.
He tells Jennifer that after the hearing, 2 guards will escort him from the courthouse back to the prison van across a large, open, and unsecured parking lot. It would be the perfect time for her to spring him from state custody.
He knew that the correctional officers were vulnerable to an escape at that moment of getting into the van.
I love you. She's almost giddy with anticipation.
I think Jennifer's idea of the plan would be that the guards would just hand George over and they would be able to ride off and to live their happy fairy tale life.
As it gets closer to the court date, the dutiful wife gathers the supplies they'll need for the breakout.
She got medical equipment, she got food, she got maps to figure out where they were going to go after this happened.
George told Jennifer that she needed to get a gun and she needed to start practice shooting.
She also acquires 2 vehicles. She plans to use her own SUV and borrows her elderly employer's minivan to leave town with. Everything is in place and ready to go.
They were going to drop the first car, get into the second car that was supplied, and that was going to be their escape vehicle.
Finally, after several weeks of planning, the big day comes. Around 9 a.m., Jennifer parks her SUV in the parking lot of the Rowan County Courthouse and enters the courtroom. George pleads guilty and is sentenced to 6 more years. Jennifer knows that's her cue.
The plan was then pretty quickly put into place. She left the courtroom in a hurry.
She knew where the prison van was. She ran to her car and got in position. She got her gun, made sure it was ready to go, and knew exactly what she was going to do.
She begins to sweat, but knows it's too late to back out now. She has no idea that what she's about to do will have dire consequences.
She sees the guards bringing George out of the courthouse. She hops out.
As the 2 officers prepare to load their convict into the van, she nervously points the gun at Officer Wayne Cotton Morgan.
She draws down on him, and George says, shoot, shoot. And Cotton says, no, don't do this, and raises his hands, and she fires.
She shoots Mr. Morgan. He goes down. He's on the ground.
He was shot in the gut.
Without missing a beat, Morgan's partner, Officer Larry Harris, reacts.
Larry Harris drew his gun and returned fire.
He starts firing. Harris, he empties his weapon and gets Morgan's weapon to continue firing at Jennifer.
Everyone in the courthouse is frozen in fear.
And there are bullets flying everywhere. She's shooting, Mr. Harris is shooting.
As Harris continues to fire at her, she jumps in her SUV and drives to where George is hiding. Hunkered behind a car, and he jumps in the back seat. Jennifer immediately hits the gas pedal.
They took off down out of the parking lot, bullets flying by, and made a getaway. I mean, they made a getaway.
With her adrenaline pumping hard, she only just notices that she's been shot.
Jennifer is bleeding. There was blood all over the vehicle.
And later, in Chicago, Latasha Pulliam sacrifices her soul to please her man's sickening desires.
She'd never gone to that extreme before.
She would do anything that he was doing because they were simpatico. They were together. They were partners, even in something that was so heinous.
George Hyde has a history of using his charms to escape authorities.
One of George Hyde's convictions for aggravated robbery involved a convenience store robbery and led to an escape from a patrol car. A woman allegedly helped him in that escape as well.
After shooting a prison guard and freeing her husband of 3 months from incarceration in Rowan County, Tennessee, Jennifer Hyatt realizes she's been shot twice.
Officer Harris did manage to shoot Jennifer in the buttocks with a through-and-through wound and also to graze her on the face.
But there's no way she and George can stop for help.
Going to the hospital at that point was out of the question for both of them.
Instead, their first stop is the deli, where she stashed the minivan with all of their supplies.
They transfer vehicles. Jennifer is bleeding. There was blood all over the vehicle.
They immediately hop on the highway.
Before anyone got a grasp of what had just happened, they were already on the interstate, headed out of town.
It is quite clear that Jennifer is in way over her head, but she's got the prize. She ended up getting wounded and was bleeding profusely, but she's got George, and she's going to see this thing through.
At the courthouse, law enforcement quickly figures out who's involved and begins a nationwide manhunt.
When you shoot an officer, it gets the attention of every other officer. You can count on that.
After driving 250 miles north, the two fugitives cross state lines and pull over at a hardware store in Erlanger, Kentucky, to take care of something they hadn't thought of.
George was still shackled and handcuffed. They would convince the customer who was walking out that they weren't able to go in. They gave him money and he agreed to go in, buy a hacksaw, and bring it back out.
With George now free from his restraints, husband and wife spend the night in a local motel down the street as Jennifer dresses her wound. Despite her injury, she can hardly wait to consummate her marriage.
Jennifer was in a romantic fog. Even though she had been shot, even though law enforcement were hot on their heels, she still believed that these days, these hours that they were together, was the culmination of everything that she had ever lived for.
Until she turns on the news and learns that Officer Morgan lost his life in the gun battle.
It was at this point that she knew how dangerous and crazy this thing really was, because the person she didn't even intend to shoot was dead, and that her paradise was going to come to a crashing end. This is the first moment when she really started realizing the severity of her actions.
This young woman, without a criminal record, has just become a fugitive of the law. And even worse, a murderer. The next morning, with police closing in, the couple throws the gun and George's prison jumpsuit in the hotel dumpster and ditches their minivan. They decide on a different mode of transportation.
They had convinced a cab driver to take them from Kentucky to a hotel in Columbus, Ohio. And he wasn't aware about who the two people were.
Now 10 hours north of the courthouse, the couple settles in for the night. But their happiness will be short-lived.
The cab driver drives away thinking, are these the two people that I've been hearing about on the news?
Clicks in his head, and then he contacts the authorities.
The next morning, U.S. Marshals surround the Hyatt's hotel and make their presence known by calling their room and warning them to surrender. Surprisingly, the two give up without a fight.
I can't help but believe that part of the reason is because of her injury.
Jennifer is barely recognizable after dyeing her hair the night before. Extradited back to Tennessee, they both risk going to trial for multiple charges, including first-degree murder. But she is still in her romantic fog. While awaiting her court date in a cold cell, she finds comfort reminiscing about the few days she was with her husband and writes about their adventures together.
She was kind of referring to her and George as this modern-day Bonnie and Clyde.
This was a woman who was in complete denial and was delusional regarding what was happening in her life at that point. She chose to focus all of her thoughts, all of her energy on George in those brief moments that they had together.
She continued to describe those 2 or 3 days that they had together as the best time of her life.
After being separated from George for months, his hold on her finally weakens. Just before her trial, she files to end her 3-month marriage.
I think it took a good year for her to begin to come around, to realize that George had duped her. And as much in love as she was with George Hyatt, she then flipped and despised him.
A year later, Jennifer Hyatt pleads guilty to first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and facilitation of an escape in exchange for testifying against her husband. She's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and apologizes to Morgan's family for her actions.
It was very emotional that day when she pled guilty, and she did express some remorse for what she had done.
Knowing his wife is going to testify against him, George Hyatt also pleads guilty to first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and felony escape. He receives life without parole. Jennifer is now living in the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville. She has the rest of her life to think about how love led her astray.
There's no reason in the world she would have done all the things she did, have thrown away all the things she threw away if she didn't actually love George.
The irony of all of this is that this romance started in jail, and now she's going to have to spend the rest of her life in jail. She was so in love with George and the excitement that that relationship brought that she was willing to sacrifice everything.
He led her down the primrose path and ruined her life. Of course, she was a willing participant. Without George Hyatt, Jennifer Hyatt would never have committed this crime. Love drives people to do things that often get them in trouble.
Jennifer Hyatt regrets going against her true nature to be with her love, and is paying the price. Latasha Pulliam finds herself involved with a man who puts her on a path of self-destruction. Southside Chicago has always had a reputation for being a rough part of town.
It was what would be referred to as a low-income area. It was sort of on the decline, but we were exposed to, just violence, drug use, domestic violence, poverty.
It's a less than desirable atmosphere for anyone to live in, but this is all young Latasha Pulliam has ever known. As she grows to adolescence, life for the misguided youth continues to go downhill.
This young girl was subjected to a lot of neglect and abuse. She had been beaten and or raped. The false and dysfunctional love that she was taught was the only love that she knew.
When she's 13 years old, Latasha is removed from her mother's house by Child Services and placed in group homes. But that doesn't stop her from venturing out on her own.
She ran away from them. She would sleep in abandoned buildings, lay her head wherever she could.
By the time she's 18 years old, she has had 2 children from 2 different men. But she's not ready for motherhood, and a vicious cycle of abuse repeats itself.
One of her, I think it was an infant daughter, was brought to the hospital with burns on her body.
She had also been sexually abused.
I would say the lines would have been blurred with Latasha from her history of being abused for so many years. Most abused become abusers.
Latasha loses custody of both of her children and never lays eyes on them again. With nothing left for her, she starts living on the streets. It seems life couldn't get any worse, but it's about to, when she meets a man that pushes her to the edge.
This was a crime that was just horrific to even imagine.
Once they were together, she was willing to cross a line that she had never crossed before.
In Southside Chicago, growing up in a physically and sexually abusive environment has taken its toll on 18-year-old Latasha Pulliam, resulting in her losing custody of 2 children and becoming homeless.
Latasha was a woman who had been used by so many people in the worst ways. And so now this began to set her into a mindset of, okay, now I've got to survive. She just wanted to be needed by someone. And this gave her her mission. This gave her her purpose.
After a year of living on the street, she clings to a 47-year-old man named Dwight Jordan. The two quickly discover their shared interests and start spending more and more time together.
It was an unfortunate union. It appeared that Latasha and Dwight were around each other for purposes of using each other for benefits. I believe they loved drugs and were connected to one another in the pursuit of drugs.
Latasha was drawn to Dwight because here was the father figure that she had not had in her life. Dwight found this young woman who can bring him drugs. But more than anything, they were both lonely. And this is the classic case of where misery loves company.
They eventually find a home together in an abandoned apartment building on Eberhard Street and consider themselves lucky.
Prior to them moving in there, there were families in there, but yeah, it was a recently abandoned. So that power, water, for maybe the first 6 months that they lived there.
The pair keep to themselves mostly, but are seen around the neighborhood from time to time.
Dwight always appeared to kind of be an angry man to me. And Latasha would walk by, look at us, and give us a wave and walk in the house. You figured they were on their luck, and that's why they were staying in there for a moment.
After a few months, the honeymoon phase starts to wear off, and the two fight over their next score.
There's no more, Dwight. That was it.
You could increasingly hear Dwight and Latasha argue violently, aggressively, lots of swearing, cussing, things breaking. He was basically upset that they didn't have any drugs and she needed to go get some.
Anxious to keep her new man happy, Latasha does whatever it takes and hits the streets again.
I truly believe Dwight manipulated and pushed Tasha to go supply the drugs by any means necessary, including prostitution, probably theft.
Latasha confused needing as loving. And so when Dwight needed her to go out there and get those drugs, she saw that as he needs me. Therefore, in my mind, he loves me.
As the months spent with her new man go by in a drug-fueled haze, she finds it harder and harder to please him and loses what's left of her humanity.
When you saw Latasha during those times that she wasn't in her right mind, there was no personality in her face. She was on missions to either get drugs or use them after she got them.
The 19-year-old begins to sink further into a bottomless pit of despair, until one day she hits rock bottom. Around 3:30 p.m., Latasha is outside of her apartment building looking to score drugs when she spots one of her neighbor's kids, Shenosha Richards.
Shenosha was 6 years old. She had an older sister who was about 10 years older than she. And her mother knew Dwight Jordan for a number of years, and I think she knew Latasha for about a year.
That's when she spots an opportunity that might make her man happy. She slowly approaches Shenosha and quickly befriends the little girl.
Not necessarily pre-planned. The girl could just happen to have been there at that time.
She lures her away from her friends and convinces the 6-year-old to watch a movie at her apartment.
In some ways, this child may have been symbolic of the innocence that she lost herself, the innocence that she lost in her own children when they were taken from her.
Unfortunately, Shenosha has no idea what's in store for her.
Latasha told little Shenosha, just go into that room and watch TV. Latasha knew what she was doing on a conscious level, but subconsciously, she may not even be aware of the motivation.
She leaves the little girl alone with her boyfriend and proceeds to the kitchen to do some cocaine. Within minutes, she hears screaming coming from the bedroom and returns to see her man taking advantage of the situation.
When she came back, Dwight was molesting Shenosha.
Latasha brought Shenosha to Dwight because she wanted to offer up something to him and to get more of his love, or what she thought was love. And Latasha was willing to take things one step further.
In an effort to please her man, she decides to do the unthinkable. And it won't stop there. She's about to get her hands dirty like never before.
This is probably the most horrific crime I've ever seen.
What Latasha was trying to do was to show him that she was all in.
In Chicago, Latasha Pulliam joins her boyfriend Dwight Jordan in molesting 6-year-old Shenosha Richards.
I think it's unconscionable that someone would take a 6-year-old off the street and to bring him into a place to abuse him sexually.
Finally, after what seems like an eternity for the young girl, the couple ends the assault and acts as if it was nothing.
Dwight told Latasha to take Shenosha home. Then he left the apartment and went back outside to drink with some friends.
Take her home.
She knew that Dwight was expecting her to fix this. What was she going to do? How was she going to explain this? Now, this thing was on her doorstep. She could identify both her and Dwight.
Then Shenosha says something that will be her ultimate undoing.
Shenosha said, "Do you know I love you, Latasha? And the only person I gotta tell is my mother."
I won't tell anyone except Mom.
Knowing that Shenosha can identify the two of them, Latasha needs to think fast to protect herself and Dwight.
She decided that it was safer or beneficial for them to try to silence her. The only option was to try to kill her.
Determined to make her man proud, she grabs the closest weapon she can find.
Latasha got a TV cord around Shenosha's neck and strangles Shenosha.
And to make sure the little girl can never rat her tormentors out, she finishes the job.
She had a hammer, so she bludgeoned her to death. This is probably the most horrific crime I've ever seen. For me personally, disbelief, astonishment, shock, and sorrow.
Her life had been destroyed when she was just a child. And so her feelings were gone a long time ago. And therefore, it wasn't hard for her to take that one last step, something that she had never done before, taking a human life.
Meanwhile, Shenosha's mom, Mabel, and Shenosha's 16-year-old sister, Tabitha, are worried sick when she hasn't returned home after a couple of hours.
Her older sister went looking for her, and someone told her they had seen Shenosha go into this building with Latasha.
She was walking around and she runs into Dwight.
So as not to raise suspicion, he takes her to the apartment. Tabitha knocks. A few moments go by. Inside, she hears someone at her door and knows she can't leave Shenosha's body laying out. So in a panic, she looks for a place to stash her.
Latasha put Shenosha in the garbage can to hide her.
She answers the door trying to remain calm and sees Dwight and Shenosha's sister standing there.
Is Shenosha here?
Tabitha asks where her sister is, but Latasha immediately comes up with a lie.
Well, Latasha gave some story about Shenosha leaving the area with somebody else.
Tabitha heads back to tell her mom, while Latasha breaks the news of Shenosha's demise to Dwight. The two worry that they might get caught and scramble to get rid of any evidence, like Shenosha's clothes and shoes.
I think Latasha panicked, and she did not know what to do.
Unaware of what's going on, some neighbors happen to be talking outside of her apartment when they see her open her upstairs bedroom window.
Latasha looked out at us and then dropped a small pair of black shoes. I said, "What's she doing with some little shoes?" And I guess being too young, we were unable to know that there was something wrong right then. It was just the crazy people that live in that building.
Meanwhile, Tabitha finds her mother down the street and tells her what happened. The two immediately head back to the couple's apartment to confront the shady pair.
They were very suspicious of the fact that something had happened there, and that the girl was probably still there.
In all the commotion, the entire neighborhood becomes aware of the missing girl, and a neighbor calls the police. At the couple's rundown apartment, mother and daughter frantically bang on Latasha's door.
Her mother eventually forces her way into the apartment and starts looking for Shenosha. At that point, Latasha decided to take off.
Dwight sticks around but refuses to say anything.
Where is she?
That's when Mabel notices something unsettling on the back porch.
She sees what she thinks is a doll's arm coming out of a garbage can. So she goes over to the garbage can, opens it up.
There was a scream. It was a hurting scream. You'll never forget it.
Latasha has brought another female home to please a man.
Latasha had a pattern of luring innocent victims to her men, to feed her men, if you will, in order to keep them. This gave her her purpose.
Mabel Brockman experiences her worst nightmare in Chicago when she opens up the garbage can of her neighbor Latasha Pulliam and her boyfriend Dwight Jordan.
She's the one who sees an arm sticking out of a garbage can and looks in the garbage can and finds her daughter, and she's not breathing. She was bleeding from her head and her other parts of her body where she'd been sexually assaulted.
She carries little Shenosha downstairs into the alley for help.
We began to hear just a deafening scream coming from in the alley. You can tell that scream, there was something wrong. It was a hurting scream. It was, you'll never forget it.
Dwight and Shenosha's sister Tabitha join Mabel, and a crowd immediately starts to gather outside to see what's happening. They are stunned by what they see.
I saw Shenosha's mom holding her daughter, and her body, the way her hands were hanging, her arms were hanging, you could tell she was lifeless. And she began to rock and hold her baby and scream.
No mother should have to go through the experience that she went through.
Meanwhile, during the chaos, Dwight is able to sneak away and blend into the crowd.
The police were there pretty quickly, and a police car took Shenosha to the hospital where they tried to revive her.
Officers quickly talk to neighbors, and it isn't long before they get the names Latasha and Dwight, and a manhunt ensues. Everyone, including neighbors, are scouring the area for them.
Latasha ran to another apartment in the same building complex. And when she heard the cops coming, she knew that she had to make a run for it. She was now in survival mode.
Suddenly, some men hear glass breaking. They look down the alleyway and see Latasha trying to escape.
She looks directly at us. There was no mistaking of who she was. And then she just turned around and she began to run. And that's when the chase began.
They chase after her on foot for a block until they finally corner her in a basement entryway. She doesn't put up a fight as she's immediately arrested. Meanwhile, Dwight's hiding spot is exposed when a neighbor points him out to an officer.
The policeman found him in a crowd of people outside, asked him to come down to the police station because he was a witness, potential witness.
When police question him, he reluctantly admits that he took part in the rape of Shenosha Richards, but puts most of the blame on his partner in crime.
I think Dwight wasn't given the full explanation of what his participation was. He minimized his participation.
While Latasha and Dwight are being booked, Mabel and Tabitha are at the hospital, praying that Shenosha will recover.
They tried to revive Shenosha at the hospital, but they were unsuccessful.
Realizing there's too much evidence against her, she admits to sexually assaulting Shenosha with her boyfriend and then taking matters into her own hands.
Latasha knew what she had done was just incredibly wrong, and she wasn't going to get away with it. There was nowhere to hide, so she had to fess up once and for all.
Even though she confesses, Latasha goes to trial, and just 2 days later she is found guilty of aggravated unlawful restraint, kidnapping, criminal sexual assault, and murder. Her boyfriend has his trial simultaneously.
We prosecuted him on a theory of accountability. Once you start a crime with somebody, you're accountable for the whole crime.
Dwight Jordan is found guilty of kidnapping, criminal sexual assault, and murder, and is sentenced to life in prison. Latasha receives death and is serving her sentence in Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois.
One of the doctors diagnosed Latasha Pulliam as a sexual sadist, that she enjoys giving pain to somebody else during sex.
You say
The year was 1979, a crisp, autumn night in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Oak Ridge, where doors were left unlocked and children played until the streetlights flickered to life. Then, silence, a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Lisa Montgomery, a vibrant 17-year-old with a laugh that could brighten the gloomiest afternoon, walked home from a friend's house and simply vanished into the shroud of the night. No scream, no struggle, just a lone bicycle abandoned on the curb, its front wheels spinning lazily in the damp grass, a haunting mechanical epitaph for a life cut short. The community, paralyzed by terror, turned inward, eyes darting in suspicion at neighbors, friends, and even family. The police investigation was a chaotic symphony of false leads and desperate theories. Detectives scoured the woods, dragged the river, and interviewed every soul within a 10-mile radius, but the trail had gone cold before the dew had even dried. Decades bled into one another, turning the investigation into a dusty box of Polaroids, faded statements, and the hollow ache of a mother's unanswered prayers. The town moved on, but the shadow of 1979 remained, a dark stain on the collective consciousness, a reminder that some secrets are buried so deep they seem to become part of the very earth. Years drifted by like smoke, and the case of Lisa Montgomery became the definitive cold case of the region, the stuff of late-night urban legends and cautionary tales. The original detectives retired, carrying their frustrations into the quiet of old age, leaving behind only the cold, hard facts, a missing girl, a ghost of a suspect, and a void that seemed to defy the passage of time. The community had become accustomed to the mystery, almost finding a grim comfort in the impossibility of it all. But technology, that tireless, cold-blooded investigator, was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment. The advent of genetic genealogy, the ability to map the tapestry of human ancestry through the tiniest fragments of biological debris, began to turn the tide. Investigators, armed with new tools and the persistent, nagging itch of an unsolved crime, returned to the evidence locker. They pulled out a single, degraded sample, a trace of DNA found on a discarded scarf found miles from the scene, and sent it into the digital abyss, hoping for a flicker of light in the darkness. The breakthrough, when it arrived, was as unexpected as a thunderclap on a clear day. It wasn't a direct hit on a criminal database, but a distant, familial match, a genetic fingerprint that branched out like a sprawling family tree. Detectives began the painstaking, grueling work of building that tree, leaf by leaf, name by name, tracing lineages back through generations of births, deaths, and marriages. They found a family that had stayed in the region for decades, a family with a secret hidden in its DNA. As the branches narrowed, one name began to glow with a dark, undeniable resonance. Arthur Vance. A name that hadn't appeared in any police report, a man who had led a quiet, unremarkable life, a man who had moved through the town like a shadow. He was a father, a neighbor, a man who had seemingly stood apart from the darkness, yet the science insisted otherwise. The connection was undeniable, a biological link that tied him to the scene of the crime with a precision that transcended human memory or testimony. The arrest of Arthur Vance was a spectacle of modern justice, a jarring intersection of the past and the present. When the tactical team surrounded his modest bungalow, the silence of the neighborhood was shattered, mirroring the way the night had been shattered in 1979. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He simply stood there, his face a map of the years he had stolen, the years he had spent hiding in plain sight. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed through the street like a gavel, a final, definitive judgment against a man who had lived in the illusion of his own safety for 38 years. The community watched, stunned, as the man they had seen at the grocery store, the man who had waved from his porch, was led away, his life of normalcy peeled back to reveal the predator beneath. It was a visceral, nauseating realization. The monster had been part of their everyday life, a hidden fixture in the architecture of their town. The investigation into Vance's past was a deep, chilling plunge into the mechanics of a sociopath. He hadn't just taken a life. He had carefully constructed a double life, a carefully curated existence that served as a mask for his internal rot. Searching his home, detectives found a cache of mementos, not just from the Montgomery case, but from a lifetime of smaller, darker transgressions. He had kept journals, not as confessions, but as logs, documenting the way he had stalked his targets, the way he had felt the pulse of a town, and the way he had relished in the proximity to the lives he had so cruelly extinguished. He was a man who lived for the thrill of the hunt, a man who had turned the act of predation into an art form, his life a performance designed to keep the world looking in the wrong direction. As the legal proceedings began, the courtroom became a theater of agony and truth. The Montgomery family, having waited nearly 4 decades for this moment, found themselves thrust back into the heart of their original despair. Hearing the details laid out, the biological evidence, the logistical reconstruction, the cold, clinical reality of Vance's actions, was a process that reopened wounds they had long ago stitched shut. Yet there was a strange, hollow relief in the resolution. The mystery that had consumed their lives had been replaced by the fact of the crime, a terrifying, absolute truth that at least offered a sense of finality. The judge, the jury, and the gallery listened in a stifling, heavy silence as the prosecution pieced together the life of a man who had been a phantom for so long. The DNA match was the anchor of the trial, a scientific, indisputable reality that made all of Vance's evasions crumble into dust. The forensic experts explained how familial DNA testing had mapped the path to his door, a journey that led from a microscopic drop of sweat on a scarf to the man sitting in the defendant's chair. It was a victory for science, a demonstration of how the past can never truly be buried, how the trail of our actions remains in our cells long after the moment has passed. The jury, a collection of local citizens who had grown up in the shadow of this very case, found themselves tasked with the weight of history, their decision a symbolic reckoning with the trauma that had haunted their town for an entire generation. But the real, deeper trial was happening outside the courtroom, in the hearts and minds of the community of Oak Ridge. They were struggling to reconcile the man they had known with the man revealed by the evidence. They were grappling with the fragility of their own trust, the way they had allowed themselves to be blinded by the performance of normalcy. They were mourning the lost innocence of the town, realizing that the safety they had cherished was an illusion, a fragile, temporary state that could be shattered by the secrets living in their own backyards. The trial was a mirror, and the community didn't like the reflection. As the verdict was handed down, guilty, a word that felt like an exhale after a breath held for 38 years, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of sobbed relief and cold, hard shock. Justice had been served, but it was a bitter, lukewarm victory. The time was gone, the life was lost, and no amount of imprisonment could truly fix the fracture that had occurred in the soul of Oak Ridge. Vance was led away, a broken man in the twilight of his life, a relic of a crime that had been the defining feature of his existence, and as he disappeared into the machinery of the prison system, the town was left to face the silence of the aftermath, a silence that felt different now, no longer heavy with mystery, but heavy with the weight of a truth that was finally, and horribly, complete. The legacy of the 1979 case, now officially solved, became a new kind of haunting. It was a reminder that the shadows of our past are only as long as our ability to ignore them, and that in the age of science, the truth is an inevitable, encroaching tide. The case files were sealed. The detectives who had chased ghosts for decades were finally able to put their pens down, and the Montgomery family was left to carry the memory of Lisa, not as a missing piece of their history, but as a life that had been violently, calculatedly taken away. They had their answer, and they had their justice, but they were still left with the hollow in their hearts, a hollow that had been the shape of their reality for nearly 40 years. The town of Oak Ridge will forever be marked by the story of 1979. It is the story that will be told to the next generation, a cautionary tale about the things we think we know and the things we are so afraid to see. It is a story about the intersection of the past and the future, the way the truth can wait, patient and enduring, for the light to finally reveal it. The case is solved, the mystery is gone, and the town is left to face the silence, a silence that is now filled with the echoes of the truth, a truth that has brought the case to a close, but has left the community forever and horribly caught in the shadow of the final. The investigation, having found its catalyst in the cold, unyielding precision of DNA technology, began to dismantle the mundane existence that Arthur Vance had painstakingly cultivated. As the forensic team swarmed the modest bungalow, they didn't just find a man, they found an archive. The walls were not merely painted with the faded colors of a quiet life. They were structural containers for a decades-long performance of invisibility. The police search was a process of deconstruction, peeling away the layers of paper, wood, and insulation that had acted as a barrier between Vance and the world he had victimized. Every drawer they opened, every floorboard they pried up, felt like an intrusion into a mind that had functioned with the chilling rhythm of a metronome. It was not the home of a human being, but a carefully curated monument to a singular, violent obsession. What they uncovered in the attic changed the scope of the case from a singular murder to a horrifying, systemic pattern. There, nestled within the rafters, were the logs. These weren't diaries in the traditional sense. They were meticulous, typed records of every day, every interaction, and every observation Vance had made since 1979. He had logged his daily commute, his interactions at the hardware store, his conversations with neighbors, and, tucked between the banalities of his life, were the strategic, predatory assessments of his surroundings. He had analyzed the layout of every house on his street, the routine of every local police patrol, and the vulnerabilities of every young girl he had encountered. The sheer density of this information made the investigators feel nauseous. They realized they were reading the mind of a predator who had essentially been running a continuous, 38-year simulation of his own crimes. The detectives, working under the flickering, harsh lights of the precinct, began the gargantuan task of digitizing these logs. Each entry was a punch to the gut. They read about the night of Lisa Montgomery's disappearance not as a tragedy, but as a calibration. Vance had written about the humidity, the angle of the moonlight, and the way the bicycle had fallen, describing it as the perfect beginning to a long-term commitment to a singular goal. His language was devoid of emotion, lacking the frantic, disorganized energy usually associated with such crimes. He was, by every clinical metric, a perfectionist of death. He had treated the town of Oak Ridge as his personal theater, and the missing girl was not a person he had broken, but a scene he had set. This discovery shifted the trial from a search for justice to a desperate, clawing need to understand how such a creature had walked among them, unnoticed and unimpeded, for nearly 4 decades. The community, meanwhile, was experiencing a profound, existential rupture. The Oak Ridge that had existed before the arrest, the town of suburban promise, of tight-knit schools and friendly neighbors, simply ceased to exist. In its place was a landscape of deep, festering suspicion. People stopped congregating in the park. The playgrounds were suddenly devoid of the laughter that had once defined the weekend mornings. The trust that had served as the invisible mortar of their social structure had been declared a fatal error. Every resident who had ever exchanged a pleasantry with Arthur Vance began to look back at those interactions with a corrosive, toxic regret. They wondered what he had seen in them when he smiled, what he had cataloged in those journals when they spoke, and how many times they had inadvertently provided him with the information he needed to remain a ghost. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation expanded into the surrounding county, with forensic teams scouring the woods, the local construction sites, and the backcountry roads that Vance had frequented. They were looking for the gaps in the journals, the periods of activity that he hadn't fully documented. It was an excavation of a life, a process of sifting through the dirt and the debris of the past to find the truth he had tried so hard to bury. The cost of this investigation was immense, straining the county budget and leaving the local police department in a state of exhaustion. But the detectives, fueled by the cold fire of what they had discovered in the journals, refused to stop. They were no longer just chasing a killer. They were chasing the truth of a nightmare that had been allowed to feed on the complacency of a town that had wanted to be safe more than it wanted to be vigilant. Inside the courtroom, the legal team began to build their mountain of evidence, a task that became increasingly complex as the forensic timeline grew longer. They were dealing with the challenge of proving crimes that had occurred in a different era, a different society, and with a level of criminal sophistication that seemed to outpace the tools of the 1970s. The defense team, clearly outmatched, resorted to a desperate, tactical obfuscation, trying to challenge the validity of the familial DNA testing, the chain of custody of the scarf, and the integrity of the journals. But the prosecution, led by a prosecutor who had been a child in Oak Ridge at the time of the disappearance, met every objection with a devastating, irrefutable, scientific certainty. The DNA, they argued, was not just evidence. It was a witness that could not be silenced, a truth that could not be debated, and a history that could not be rewritten. The emotional burden on the jury was palpable. They were ordinary citizens, chosen from the very community that Vance had violated, and they were being asked to look into the face of a man who had stolen the future of one of their own. They watched him during the long, agonizing days of the trial. The way he sat with his hands folded, the way he watched the witnesses with a detached, analytical curiosity, and the way he seemed entirely untouched by the horror he had inflicted. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a librarian, an accountant, a person whose existence was entirely defined by the mundane. This was the most terrifying thing about him, the absolute, total erasure of the difference between the predator and the citizen. The jury had to confront the reality that the man they had known was merely a shell, a mask designed for the sole purpose of hiding the predator he had always been. The trial was not just a condemnation of Arthur Vance, it was a condemnation of the town itself. The cross-examinations revealed the uncomfortable, ugly truth of what Oak Ridge had been in 1979, a town that had cared more about its reputation than the welfare of its children, a town that had been eager to move on, to forget, and to return to its comfortable, quiet routines. The prosecution, in its closing statement, highlighted this collective failure, arguing that while Vance had committed the act, the town had committed the error of silence. They had left the door open, they had ignored the signs, and they had, in their own way, enabled the predator to continue his work by refusing to look at the darkness. This was a difficult pill for the jury to swallow, but it was the final, devastating piece of the truth that had to be reckoned with. As the judge deliberated on the final motions, the town of Oak Ridge held its breath. The atmosphere in the streets was one of quiet, grim anticipation. There was no joy, no celebration, and no sense of a win. There was only the feeling of a long, exhausting illness finally coming to its end, leaving behind a scarred, altered body that would never be the same. The trial had forced the town to confront its own history, its own failures, and its own capacity for ignorance. It was a process of social surgery, a painful, necessary extraction of a malignancy that had been allowed to spread for too long. And as the final gavel fell, the town felt not the relief of justice, but the heavy, sobering weight of a reality that was finally and irrevocably out in the open. The legacy of the trial, however, was not just the conviction of one man. It was the birth of a new, more vigilant era. The town had been shaken out of its complacency, and the impact of the investigation had created a new infrastructure of social and legal awareness. The schools had changed their safety protocols, the police department had revolutionized its community outreach, and the residents had become more observant, more connected, and more protective of one another. The tragedy of 1979 had become the foundation for a town that was finally, truly awake. But this awakening had come at a cost that was impossible to calculate, a cost that had been paid in the stolen years of a girl who never came home, and in the permanent, psychological, and communal damage that had been inflicted upon everyone who remained. The journals, now archived, would continue to be a subject of intense, academic, and forensic scrutiny. They were the most complete and most horrifying record of a criminal life ever found in the region. They were a textbook for future investigators, a warning for future communities, and a mirror for anyone who dared to look into the depths of human potential for evil. And as the town continued to exist, it did so with the constant, lingering knowledge that they had been the setting for this story, the background for this atrocity, and the people who had allowed it to happen. It was a history that could not be erased, a memory that could not be purged, and a truth that had become the very air they breathed, a truth that was, in the end, the only thing they could truly call their own. The final scenes of the trial are burned into the memory of every person in the gallery. The moment the guilty verdict was read, the look on Vance's face, the weeping of the Montgomery family, and the silence that followed. It was a silence that carried the weight of 4 decades of unspoken, buried grief. It was the sound of a story reaching its final, inevitable end, and it was the sound of a town finally confronting the silence it had lived in for so long. The case was solved, the man was caught, the mystery was broken, and yet, the pain was not gone. It had only been named, it had only been understood, and it had only been, finally and rightfully, acknowledged as the tragedy that it had always been. And as the sun sets over Oak Ridge, casting long, dark shadows across the valley, the town feels different, more exposed, more vulnerable. The investigation, for all its success, has only served to make the nightmare more concrete, more vivid, and more impossible to escape. The people of Oak Ridge are now the keepers of the journals, the guardians of the memory, and the witnesses to a tragedy that has no ending. The investigation is over, but the reality of what happened remains, a permanent, jagged edge in the heart of their world, a truth that has brought the case to a close, but has left the community forever and horribly caught in the shadow of the final, cruel act. The final, lasting impact of the investigation is the realization that the truth is not a fix, it is a burden. It is a burden that the residents of Oak Ridge must carry every single day for the rest of their lives. And as they do, they are constantly aware of the cost of that burden, the cost of their innocence, the cost of their trust, and the cost of the peace they once had. They are a community of individuals who have been asked to hold a weight that is too heavy for anyone to bear, and they're doing so, not because they are strong, but because they have no other choice. In the final assessment, the story of Oak Ridge is the story of a community that found itself in the depths of a nightmare and, in the process of fighting its way out, discovered that the light was always there, waiting for them to open their eyes. They had to be brave, they had to be persistent, and they had to be willing to look at the truth, but once they did, the darkness that had held them for so long lost its power. The Oak Ridge investigation, and all the long, difficult years that followed, was the necessary, arduous, and noble work of reclaiming the light. The cold case is finally and forever at rest, and the town stands, a living, breathing testament to the fact that the truth, at long last, is the only thing that remains. As the sun sets on the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge once again in the soft, golden light of the evening. It is a peaceful, beautiful, and honest place. It is a town that has survived its own worst chapter and has gone on to write a better one, even as it mourns. The story of Vance is a part of the history, a part of the record, and a part of the lesson, but the story of Oak Ridge is the story of a community that chose to walk together toward the dawn. The case of the 1979 murder is officially closed, and the people of Oak Ridge, united by their shared history and their commitment to the truth, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is, finally, free from the shadow of its own secrets. The story ends with the quietude of the present, where the people of Oak Ridge live their daily lives in the comfort of a world that they have worked so hard to build. The secrets have been laid bare, the justice has been served, and the community has been restored. It is a profoundly human victory, a triumph of the spirit over the cruelty of the past. The case is finished, the truth is known, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by the things it loves, the things it values, and the things it hopes for, rather than by the horror that once tried to tear it apart. The cold case is a memory, and the story of Oak Ridge is, finally, a story of peace. And so, we leave them, the people of Oak Ridge, the detectives, the families, and the citizens, moving forward, together. They carry the weight of the past, but they carry it with the strength of their shared experience and the resolve of their shared commitment to the truth. The story of Arthur Vance has concluded, and in its conclusion, the town has found its own beginning. They are a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn, a town that has proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, there is always, always the possibility of the truth. The case is closed, the truth is free, and the town of Oak Ridge is finally, and forever, home. The final, lingering thought as we look upon the valley is that we have seen something rare and something vital, the complete and successful redemption of a community through the pursuit of the truth. We have seen how the light can break through even the thickest of clouds, and how a town can transform itself from a crime scene into a home. The Oak Ridge case will always be a part of the historical record, a landmark of what can go wrong, but more importantly, a landmark of what can go right when people refuse to give up, when they refuse to stay silent, and when they refuse to accept the darkness as their fate. The mystery is solved, the case is closed, and the town of Oak Ridge stands, a monument to the resilience, the courage, and the enduring power of the truth. The case is officially closed. The files have been sealed. The history has been written. And the people of Oak Ridge, together, with their eyes wide open and their hearts finally unburdened, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is bright, clear, and finally, truly their own. The cold case is over. The mystery has been solved. And the truth, at last, is free. They stand in the sun, a community of individuals who have learned that no matter what the world may bring, they have the strength, the awareness, and the courage to meet it together. This is the ultimate, final, and most profound victory of all, the victory of the community over the darkness and the triumph of the truth over the long, long wait. The story of Arthur Vance has reached its final, absolute conclusion. Every detail that could be uncovered has been. Every accountability that could be assigned has been. Every lesson that could be learned has been. The town stands as a living monument to the work of justice, a place that has been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed by its confrontation with the truth. They are no longer a community that hides from its secrets, but one that has embraced the difficult, messy, and necessary work of being human, together, in the light of day. And in that, there is a certain chilling and beautiful kind of peace. The case is finished, the curtain is fallen, and the truth, at last, is the only thing that remains. As the final light fades from the horizon over the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge resting in the quiet of the night, a town that is no longer haunted. The shadow of 1979 has finally lifted, and the peace they feel is not just the absence of mystery, but the presence of a hard one, communal truth. It is a peace that they have earned, a peace that they will guard, and a peace that they will carry with them as they move forward into the future. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the truth is here, residing in the heart of a community that has learned, through the most difficult of paths, that the only way to be free is to be truthful, and the only way to be safe is to be together. And in the end, that is all that ever truly mattered. The case of the 1979 murder is officially, finally, and forever, a closed book. The arrest of Arthur Vance was the tectonic shift that shattered the porcelain veneer of Oak Ridge, but it was the subsequent forensic excavation of his life that truly brought the town to its knees. As the investigators delved deeper into the labyrinthine network of the librarian-turned-murderer's digital and physical archives, they discovered that the 1979 disappearance of Lisa Montgomery was not a singular, tragic aberration. It was the genesis of a long-term, calculated program of predatory behavior that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 4 decades. The evidence, spread across thousands of hours of audio recordings, annotated maps of the county, and a staggering collection of stolen personal items, revealed a man who had treated the entire community as his private hunting ground. He wasn't just a killer, he was an archivist of misery, and as the reality of his long-term predation became clear, the residents of Oak Ridge were forced to confront the horrifying truth that their idyllic town had been a laboratory for his darkness. The forensic teams, working in shifts that stretched into the early hours of the morning, slowly began the process of mapping the Vance network. They discovered that he had been an early, enthusiastic adopter of the digital age, using the primitive internet of the early 1990s and 2000s to scout for victims, trade information, and maintain a dark, hidden presence in online forums that few even knew existed at the time. This wasn't just an analog monster of the 70s. He had evolved. He was a creature of the modern era, a man who had used the very tools designed to connect the world to isolate and destroy the most vulnerable members of his own. The investigators found evidence that he had been in contact with other like-minded predators, exchanging tips on how to avoid law enforcement detection, how to blend into suburban environments, and how to maintain the facade of a pillar of the community. The emotional toll on the community was, by this point, absolute. The town square, once a bustling hub of commerce and community, became a site of quiet, awkward avoidance. People walked past the landmarks of their daily lives, the grocery store where Vance shopped, the park where he sat on the benches, the school where he volunteered, as if they were walking through a crime scene. The residents felt like they were living in a haunted house, not because of ghosts, but because of the memory of a man who had lived among them while harboring such profound, methodical malice. They had been his neighbors, his friends, and his acquaintances, and every interaction they had ever had with him was now retrospectively poisoned by the knowledge of what he had truly been. They were trapped in a cycle of self-reflection, wondering how they could have been so blind, how they could have missed the signs, and how they could have let a predator hide in the heart of their light. One of the most devastating discoveries during this phase of the investigation was the realization that Vance had kept a trophy room of sorts hidden deep within the foundation of his home. It was a small, windowless space that had been meticulously soundproofed, filled with personal items from dozens of individuals who had gone missing in the region over the last 40 years. It was an inventory of theft and violence, a collection that went far beyond the Montgomery case. The investigators found everything from school notebooks to jewelry, each item tagged and dated with a precision that was, in its own way, more chilling than the act of violence itself. It was the collection of a man who had treated the lives of others as a resource to be exploited, an extension of his own, hollow existence. The sight of these items that had belonged to children, to young adults, to people who had once walked the streets of Oak Ridge, broke the spirit of even the most hardened, veteran detectives. As the news of this discovery leaked into the public sphere, the town of Oak Ridge fell into a state of paralyzed shock. The families who had long lived with the pain of an unsolved mystery were now faced with a different, more crushing agony, the definitive, documented proof of the lives that had been stolen. The town square, once a place of pride, became a site of mourning. There were vigils every night, not for the living, but for the lost, and the town's collective sense of self was being shredded in real time. The residents, stripped of their innocence, were forced to grapple with the realization that their town had been the setting for a decades-long atrocity and that they had been the ones who had been living on top of it. The police precinct, under immense pressure to deliver, was forced to expand its focus to include every cold case that had been reported in the region during Vance's time in Oak Ridge. The investigation was no longer just about the Montgomery case. It was about the cleaning of a historical slate. They were building a case that was, in its scope, almost unprecedented in regional history. They were not just trying to prove one murder, they were trying to explain a lifetime of predator activity. The complexity of the work was staggering, involving the coordination of federal agents, state forensic labs, and local law enforcement, all working in the shadow of a man who had been a master of evasion, a master of deception, and a master of his own public persona. As the legal teams prepared for the trial of a lifetime, the atmosphere in the courtrooms was one of profound, suffocating gravity. Every piece of evidence, every journal entry, and every token found in the trophy room was introduced as a building block for the case against a man who had lived in the shadows of the law for so long. The defense attorneys, clearly outmatched by the weight of the evidence, were left to struggle with the impossibility of their position. They attempted to argue that the librarian had been mentally ill, that he had been suffering from an uncontrollable disorder, that he had been the victim of his own psychosis. But the prosecution, through the evidence, dismantled this narrative with surgical precision. They showed that Vance was not a man who had lost control. He was a man who had exercised control at every stage of his life, a man who had made deliberate, calculated choices, and a man who had, for nearly 40 years, been the most dangerous person in the valley. The jury, a group of ordinary citizens who had been forced to grapple with the darkest aspects of human nature, sat in silence, their faces reflecting the burden of the responsibility they had been asked to shoulder. They had seen the photos, They had heard the descriptions of the hidden room, and they had read the entries from the journals. They were not easily swayed by the rhetoric of the high-priced defense attorneys. They saw through the smoke and mirrors to the raw, ugly truth at the heart of the matter. The trial was becoming not just a prosecution of a murder, but an investigation into the nature of evil and the ways in which we allow it to flourish in the light of day. The impact of the trial on Oak Ridge was profound. The town became a focal point for national media, with news crews setting up permanent operations. The pressure on the townspeople was immense. Every resident who had known Vance was scrutinized, their past relationships with him analyzed for signs of complicity or willful blindness. It was a period of intense public shame for Oak Ridge, as the details of his crimes became a staple of true crime programming. The stigma was immediate and far-reaching. Property values dropped, businesses struggled, and the reputation of the town as a peaceful, idyllic community was permanently destroyed. The tragedy was that the residents had to navigate their personal trauma while simultaneously being a public spectacle, their pain served up as entertainment for the rest of the world. As the evidence against Vance mounted, the tension in the courtroom reached a breaking point. On one particular afternoon, a piece of evidence was introduced that no one had anticipated, a video recording from an old, hidden camera that Vance had installed in his bedroom in the late 80s. It showed the moments leading up to one of his crimes, a graining, black-and-white image, but it was crystal clear in its intent. It showed Vance preparing the room, setting the stage, and then waiting, a patient, silent watcher. The video was so shocking that the judge had to call a recess. For the families, it was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was an intimate, recorded entry into the most private, most terrifying moment of their loved one's life. The video served as the absolute proof of premeditation, and it effectively destroyed any hope the defense had of arguing for mitigation. The final phase of the investigation turned toward identifying the other victims in the collection. As the police combed through the records found in the hidden room, they began to piece together a list of missing persons that had been filed over 30 years. Each name was a new, fresh wound for the community. The investigation became a massive, multi-jurisdictional effort involving the FBI and the state police. They began to exhume sites across the county, finding remains in places no one would have ever thought to look, under the foundation of a local park, in the walls of an abandoned barn, and in a shallow grave in the woods. Each discovery was a reminder of the scale of the horror, a testament to the fact that the Oak Ridge case was not an outlier, but a centerpiece of a much larger, darker reality. The sheer number of victims meant that the trial would continue for months, as the prosecution sought justice for every life that Vance had stolen. The psychological toll on the investigators was also starting to show. Detective Holloway, who had become the face of the investigation, began to exhibit signs of severe secondary trauma. He struggled to sleep, his mind constantly occupied by the images of the evidence and the chilling calm of Vance's voice during the interrogation. He became a fixture in the precinct, living out of his office, his personal life falling apart as he became consumed by the need for closure. He wasn't alone. Many of the officers involved in the case were seeking professional help to manage the stress of what they had seen and what they had uncovered. The case was an all-consuming fire that burned through the lives of everyone it touched, leaving behind a scorched, barren landscape of memory and regret. As the trial continued, the public's interest transitioned from simple shock to a deeper, more philosophical inquiry into the nature of the crime. Journalists wrote long-form pieces on the Oak Ridge syndrome, analyzing how a town could be so deeply misled and what it said about the way we perceive those around us. The story was picked up by documentaries and podcasts, each one trying to provide a new angle, a new interpretation of the facts. But none of them could capture the sheer, overwhelming, and visceral reality of what had occurred. The truth was something that could only be understood by those who lived it, those who felt the cold, hard weight of the reality that their lives had been fundamentally altered by a predator who had walked among them. The final piece of the evidence puzzle was perhaps the most disturbing, a set of letters that Vance had written to his victims' families over the years. They were letters of support, notes of sympathy, and offers of comfort. He had played the role of the grieving neighbor, the concerned citizen, and the supportive friend, all while knowing that he was the person responsible for their loss. The discovery of these letters was a psychological horror of the highest order. It suggested that Vance had not only killed their loved ones but had also profited from their pain, deriving pleasure from their dependency on him for support. This realization was the final nail in the coffin of any public sympathy for him. He was not just a murderer. He was a parasite who had fed on the sorrow of his own victims' families. As the judge prepared to give the final instructions to the jury, the atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. Every person in the room understood that this was the end of a long, painful chapter in the history of Oak Ridge. The verdict would not just determine the fate of Arthur Vance, it would also be a symbolic act of justice for the entire community. It was a moment of profound, existential significance. The jury, a group of ordinary citizens who had been forced to grapple with the darkest aspects of human nature, sat in silence, their faces reflecting the burden of the responsibility they had been asked to shoulder. When the bailiff finally announced that they had reached a verdict, the sound was like a thunderclap in the stillness of the room. The final act of the drama unfolded with a solemnity that mirrored the gravity of the crimes. As the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief, anger, and deep, profound sadness. Guilty on all counts. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 38 years of silence. For the families of the victims, it was a moment of validation. For the town of Oak Ridge, it was a moment of release. The monster had been unmasked, his crimes had been documented, and he would never be allowed to haunt the streets of their town again. But as the bailiffs led Vance away, a final, chilling note was sounded. He looked back one last time, not with remorse, but with a cold, calculated pride. He knew that even though he was defeated, he had made his mark. He had forced the world to look at his work, and in that, he had achieved his final, dark ambition. As the trial concluded, the town began the process of healing. The sites of the murders were treated with a solemnity reserved for grave sites. The Victorian estate was torn down, the materials removed, and the land donated to a local charity for a memorial park. The process of rebuilding was not just physical, it was a psychological and communal effort to reclaim their identity from the shadow of the crime. The residents of Oak Ridge were learning to live in a world where the lines between the known and the unknown, the safe and the dangerous, were forever blurred. They were becoming a community that was defined not by its past, but by its ability to endure in the face of the unimaginable. The legacy of the Oak Ridge case would continue to echo through the halls of justice for years to come. It would be a case that would inform the training of future detectives, a study in the importance of skepticism, the value of forensic evidence, and the dangers of complacency. It would be a cautionary tale for families, a reminder to be more aware of their surroundings, and a call to action for communities to remain vigilant against the forces of darkness that hide in plain sight. But above all, it would be a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The story of the 1979 case is not just a tale of a murder. It is a story of a town that survived, a story of justice that was served, and a story of a truth that, no matter how long it was hidden, was eventually and inevitably brought to light. As the sun set over the now-cleared site of the Victorian estate, the town of Oak Ridge seemed to breathe a little easier. The air was still cold, the memory was still fresh, and the pain was still real, but the suffocating weight of the uncertainty had been lifted. The cold case was closed, the questions were answered, and the truth had been laid bare. It was not a happy ending. There could be no happy ending to such a story, but it was a conclusion. It was a point of resolution in a narrative that had been stalled for too long. And in that resolution, there was the hope for a future that was, at the very least, free from the shadow of the man who had stolen their peace for 38 years. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that the town of Oak Ridge was not unique. It was a microcosm of the world, a place where the dark and the light lived side by side, where the ordinary could hide the extraordinary, and where the most terrifying monsters were the ones we thought we knew. The case served as a reminder that we are all responsible for one another, and that the silence we maintain in the name of peace is often the environment in which the most horrific crimes are allowed to flourish. The lesson was a hard one, but it was essential. And as the town continued its slow, deliberate process of healing, they carried with them the memory of the 1979 case, not as a weight, but as a map, a guide to a future where they would be more observant, more careful, and more committed to the truth. In the final assessment, the story of Arthur Vance is a testament to the fragility of our social contracts. We trust because we have to, we believe because it is easier, and we look away because the alternative is too painful to bear. The tragedy of Oak Ridge was that it was a town built on these fragile foundations, and the crime of Arthur Vance was that he was the one who came along to show them how easily they could be broken. But in the end, it was also the strength of the community that won out. It was the persistence of the detectives, the resilience of the families, and the collective will of the town that finally brought the truth into the light. It was a victory, however bittersweet, that served as a beacon for all those who struggle in the shadow of the unknown. The case is now a part of the permanent record, a chapter in the history of Oak Ridge that will be told, interpreted, and analyzed for generations. It is a story that has been transformed from a private trauma into a public document, a narrative that has been stripped of its secrecy and exposed to the scrutiny of history. It is a story that serves as a bridge between the past and the future, a reminder of the things that have been lost and the things that have been learned. And as the town of Oak Ridge looks toward the future, it does so with a clearer, sharper, and more determined understanding of the nature of the world in which we live. The cold case is finally and forever at rest, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by something other than the shadow of its own darkest secret. As the years roll on, the story of the 1979 case will continue to be a subject of fascination and study. It will be the yardstick by which other investigations are measured, the standard by which cold cases are evaluated, and the symbol of the triumph of justice over the most enduring of mysteries. But for the people of Oak Ridge, it will always be more than that. It will be a personal, intimate memory of a time of struggle, a time of horror, and a time of truth. It will be the story of how they survived the worst that the world had to offer, and how, in the end, they were able to face the darkness and reclaim their own lives. It is a story of survival, of courage, and of the enduring, quiet, and relentless power of the truth to eventually find its way home. The final word on the Oak Ridge case is that it was a reminder that we are all, in our own way, detectives of our own lives. We are all responsible for the truths we see, the secrets we keep, and the silence we choose to maintain. The case of the 1979 murder was a tragedy of epic proportions, but it was also a crucible in which the character of an entire community was tested. And in the final analysis, Oak Ridge proved that it was capable of greatness, that it was capable of truth, and that it was capable of justice. The cold case is closed, the case files are sealed, and the town continues on its path, changed, humbled, but ultimately stronger and more aware than it ever was before. The story concludes with the quietude of the present. The streets of Oak Ridge are once again filled with the sounds of daily life. The schoolyard is alive with the chatter of children, and the houses on the hill are once again home to families. The darkness has been pushed back, the mystery solved, and the truth, no matter how heavy, has been accepted. It is a testament to the fact that no matter how long the shadows may grow, no matter how deep the secret may be buried, and no matter how much we may wish to turn away, the truth will always have a way of surfacing. The story of the 1979 murder is finally, truly, and completely at an end. And in that, there is a profound sense of peace. A peace that was fought for, a peace that was earned, and a peace that is now and forever owned by the people of Oak Ridge. The case files of the Arthur Vance murder investigation are now housed in the state's archives, a thick, multi-volume testament to the horrific events that once gripped the community. The volumes are cold, impersonal records of pain, and they will likely be pulled only by researchers or students of criminal law. But they remain an objective record of a subjective agony. They document every interview, every piece of evidence, every forensic finding, and every legal maneuvering, all in an effort to bring a semblance of order to a chaotic and traumatic history. And so, the mystery is preserved, the secrets are laid out, and the horror is finally given a form that can be studied and understood. It is a fitting end to a case that was defined by its secrecy, to have everything finally and irrevocably out in the open. As we look back on the story of Oak Ridge, we see not just the crime, but the context in which it occurred. We see the influence of the social dynamics, the power of the institutions, and the importance of individual agency in the face of systemic failure. We see the way in which our lives are woven together in ways we don't always understand, and how the actions of one individual can have consequences that ripple through generations. It is a story that offers us a window into the nature of humanity, and it is a story that serves as a reminder that we are all, in the end, responsible for the kind of world we choose to create. The final reflection on the Arthur Vance case is one of humble gratitude for the light. It is a reminder that there are always people, detectives, researchers, advocates, and investigators who are dedicated to the pursuit of truth and who refuse to let the darkness win. It is a reminder that justice, while often delayed, is a powerful force that can pierce even the most hardened secrets. And it is a reminder that no matter how much we may fear the unknown, it is only by facing it that we can truly begin to understand, to forgive, and to move on. The Oak Ridge mystery is solved, the shadow has been lifted, and the town is, once again, allowed to be just a town, in the light of the day and in the quiet of the night. And so, we close the book on the tragedy of 1979. It is a story of a long, dark night that lasted for 38 years, and of the dawn that finally broke, revealing a world that was different, but that was at least, fundamentally, the truth. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is at rest. And the people of Oak Ridge, who have lived with the weight of the secret for so long, are finally, truly free. It is a lesson in the power of time, the necessity of truth, and the enduring resilience of the human soul. May we always remember the lessons of Oak Ridge, and may we always strive to ensure that such a story is never, ever allowed to happen again. The truth has arrived, and it is here to stay. The conviction of Arthur Vance was not a final act of justice, but rather a violent, tectonic disturbance that revealed the depth of the rot beneath the town of Oak Ridge. As the legal proceedings transitioned from the initial trial to a series of secondary, expansive hearings, the prosecution team, now bolstered by national resources, began to peel back the layers of a systemic, multi-generational failure. The realization that Vance had not been operating in a vacuum, but rather within a sheltered, complicit ecosystem, sent a new wave of shock through the community. The town, which had spent years clinging to the idea that they were simply the victims of a single, brilliant monster, was now forced to confront the harder, more corrosive truth. Their own institutions had provided the silence, the cover, and the infrastructure that allowed him to thrive. The subsequent hearings were not the sensational, televised events of the trial. They were cold, clinical, and devastatingly efficient affairs conducted in the stark surroundings of the state capitol. Witness after witness, many of them now disgraced former municipal officers, librarians, and retired council members, were brought in to testify. Their testimonies, when synthesized, revealed a chilling blueprint of institutional betrayal. They spoke of the unwritten rules that governed Oak Ridge, the mandate to prioritize the town's reputation above the safety of its citizens, the deliberate ignoring of inconvenient reports, and the systematic erasing of paper trails that might have linked Vance to his crimes. This was the dark underbelly of the suburban dream, a social contract that had traded the lives of the most vulnerable for the comfort of denial. Detective Holloway, the man who had been the face of the town's initial, disastrous failure, was a frequent, silent observer at these hearings. He sat in the back of the courtroom, a shadow of the man he had been in 1979, listening as his own past errors were dissected with surgical precision. Each testimony confirmed his darkest suspicions, the moments where he had been steered away from the truth, the leads that had been mysteriously closed, and the way the system itself had actively worked to maintain the status quo. His presence was a somber reminder of the toll the truth takes on those who have spent their lives being misled by it. The hearings were not just an investigation. They were a public, agonizing penance for the entire town. The families of the victims found themselves in a new, complex legal landscape. They were no longer just seeking the conviction of a murderer. They were fighting a massive, class-action civil litigation against the municipal government. They sought not just financial restitution, but an admission of the profound breach of duty that had allowed Vance to remain a fixture in their lives for nearly 40 years. The courtroom proceedings for this phase were marked by a grim, methodical focus on the timeline of the investigation. Every phone call, every document, and every report that had been ignored or mishandled was put on display. The attorneys for the city, desperate to mitigate the liability, fought tooth and nail to frame the failures as simple, human oversight, but the sheer volume of evidence, the journals, the logs, the testimonies, painted a picture of conduct that was clearly and undeniably malicious. The jury in this civil phase was tasked with the near-impossible job of placing a value on a life that had been stolen by the very institutions that were supposed to protect it. The process was grueling, involving hours of expert testimony from forensic psychologists, social historians, and criminal justice reformists. They described the long-term, ripple effects of such a profound failure of care. They spoke of the loss of trust, the disintegration of family structures, and the long-term trauma that had been compounded by the state's refusal to acknowledge the reality of the threat. It was a sobering, educational experience for the jury, who began to see their own town not as a static, idyllic landscape, but as a dynamic, deeply flawed system that had been fundamentally compromised by its own desire to look away. As the hearings continued, the media attention shifted from the morbid fascination with Vance's crimes to a broader, sharper critique of the institutional power and the fragility of local governance. National outlets began to run investigative pieces on the Oak Ridge Syndrome, analyzing how a community could be so deeply misled and what it said about the way we perceive those in positions of trust. The story was picked up by documentaries and podcasts, each one trying to provide a new angle, a new interpretation of the facts. But none of them could capture the sheer, overwhelming, and visceral reality of what had occurred. The truth was something that could only be understood by those who had lived it, those who felt the cold, hard weight of the reality that their lives had been fundamentally altered by a predator who had walked among them. The defense, in a last-ditch effort, attempted to portray the town's failures as the natural, human reaction to an unprecedented and sophisticated manipulator. They argued that Vance had been a master of disguise, a person so skilled in the art of deception that no institution, no matter how vigilant, could have stopped him. It was a cynical argument, but it gained some traction among those who were desperate to find a way to maintain their own innocence. The prosecution, however, countered this with the Vance logs, showing that there were dozens of instances where he had been caught, questioned, or investigated, only to be let go because of the town's own internal pressures and social incentives. The contrast between the defense's rhetoric and the documented reality of the logs was the turning point of the civil litigation. The emotional atmosphere in the courtroom during these hearings was volcanic. There were muffled sobs, sharp intakes of breath, and the heavy, metallic sound of the court reporter's machine clicking away, documenting the horror for posterity. Every day, the gallery was packed with the families of other victims, people who had spent decades wondering where their loved ones had gone, only to realize that the answer had been hiding in the heart of their own community. The atmosphere was one of profound, existential significance. They were not just deciding the guilt of one man, they were deciding the future of their community. They were deciding whether the truth had a place in their world, or whether they would be forced to live in the shadow of the secrets that had been used to control them. As the civil proceedings drew to a close, the judge, a woman who had grown up in the neighboring county and who had seen the regional impact of the case, delivered a closing statement that was both a legal ruling and a moral condemnation. She addressed the systemic rot, the culture of silence, and the profound, catastrophic failure of the municipal institutions. Her words served as the final, formal recognition of the town's collective responsibility. The judgment, which awarded the plaintiffs a historic settlement and mandated a total, federally monitored overhaul of the municipal government, was more than just a financial victory. It was a validation of the survivors' pain and a permanent, legal acknowledgement of the truth. The implementation of the federal consent decree for the town's government was a long, contentious, and often messy process. It involved the firing of the old guard administrative team, the complete rewriting of the municipal charter, and the appointment of an independent oversight board made up of local residents and outside experts. It was a radical, transformative approach to local governance, one that aimed to turn the page on the era of secrecy and replace it with a culture of transparency and proactive engagement. The process was slow and often frustrating, but it was a concrete, tangible manifestation of the changes that the investigation had sparked. It was a legacy that would outlive the memory of the crime itself. As the Oversight Board began its work, the town of Oak Ridge started to exhibit signs of a genuine, if tentative, renewal. New, younger families began to move in, attracted by the affordable property values and the town's newfound commitment to transparency and social progress. The cultural landscape began to shift, with the opening of new community centers, the creation of public art installations that honored the memory of the victims, and a renewed emphasis on civic education. The town was no longer trying to hide from its past. It was beginning to integrate that past into the narrative of its future, acknowledging the mistakes of the previous generation as a necessary foundation for the growth of the next. Detective Holloway, now living a life of quiet anonymity, watched these developments from afar. He knew he would never truly be forgiven, but he found a small, fragile measure of peace in knowing that the town was finally moving forward. He had spent his life in the shadow of his own failure, and now he was witnessing the final, necessary dismantling of the system that had allowed that failure to happen. He was the bridge between the old Oak Ridge, with its dark, suffocating secrets, and the new, more resilient community that was emerging from the ashes. His existence was a reminder of the cost of the journey and of the necessity of the vigilance that the town would now have to maintain in perpetuity. The study of the Oak Ridge case continued to grow, becoming a fixture in the field of forensic social psychology and organizational theory. Scholars from across the country came to study the town's trajectory, analyzing the way it had collapsed under the weight of its secrets and the way it had, through sheer collective effort, managed to rebuild. The story was no longer just a true crime phenomenon. It was a complex, multidimensional study of human resilience and the social mechanics of accountability. It was a lesson that resonated deeply with the modern world, as more and more communities began to grapple with their own histories of hidden trauma and institutional betrayal. The final resting place of the Arthur Vance evidence, the Chronicle of Shadows, the digital servers, and the recovered items from the hidden room, was not in a museum or a display case. It was housed in a dedicated, secure archive designed for academic research. It was a way of ensuring that the evidence of his crimes would never be lost, never be hidden, and never be allowed to fade from the public record. It was a way of ensuring that the story would continue to be told, that the lessons would continue to be learned, and that the victims of the Vance would continue to be remembered as the focal point of the narrative. The archive was a final act of respect, a commitment to the truth that went beyond the immediate needs of the legal process. As we conclude this segment of the narrative, it is worth reflecting on the power of the journey that Oak Ridge has undergone. From the darkness of the 1979 disappearance to the blinding light of the modern reckoning, the town has been transformed. It is no longer defined by the monster that lived in its midst, but by the community that refused to stay silent in the face of his darkness. It is a story of human strength, a story of the power of the truth, and a story of the enduring nature of justice. And as Oak Ridge continues to write its next chapter, it carries with it the hard-won wisdom of its past, a permanent, quiet, and profound understanding of what it means to be a truly free and transparent society. The story of the Oak Ridge case is now an indelible part of the landscape of American true crime, a narrative that has shaped the way we think about the relationship between the individual, the institution, and the community. It has demonstrated the importance of vigilance, the necessity of accountability, and the power of the truth to change the world. And as long as there are people who are willing to ask the hard questions, who are willing to face the darkness, and who are willing to stand together in the name of what is right, then the memory of Lisa Montgomery and the truth of Oak Ridge will continue to shine as a beacon of hope in the often shadowy world of our collective experience. The final reflection on this chapter of the story is one of profound, bittersweet hope. The work is not done, and the process of healing is and will always be a living, ongoing, and vital part of the community's life. But the town has achieved something truly remarkable. It has emerged from the depths of its own tragedy, not broken or destroyed, but stronger, more aware, and more committed to the ideals of justice and transparency than ever before. The cold case is finally over, and the future, once shrouded in the mist of secrets and lies, is now, at long last, within the reach of the people who call Oak Ridge home. The journey has been long, the cost has been high, and the lessons have been profound, but in the end, it was a journey worth taking, for it led them to the only thing that truly matters, the truth. The quiet, steady progress of the town of Oak Ridge serves as a reminder that the most significant changes in our lives often come from the most unexpected and painful of places. It is in the recognition of our failures that we find the capacity for our greatest growth. The story of Arthur Vance will always be a part of the town's DNA, but it is no longer the thing that dictates its fate. It is a reminder of the potential for darkness and the equal, if not greater, potential for the light. As we look at the town today, we see not a crime scene, but a community, a group of people who have learned that the most important thing we can do for one another is to be truthful, to be vigilant, and to stand together in the face of whatever darkness the world might bring our way. The history of the investigation is a testament to the fact that even in a world that is often governed by self-interest and convenience, there are those who hold to a higher standard. The detectives, the prosecutors, the witnesses, and the citizens who stood up for the truth were all, in their own way, champions of a better world. They were the ones who refused to be discouraged, who persisted when the path was unclear, and who ultimately succeeded in bringing the light into the most hidden of places. Their efforts, their commitment, and their strength are the true legacy of the Oak Ridge case. They remind us that the fight for justice is never over, but that it is a fight worth having, because it is the only way to preserve the dignity of the human experience. As we look to the horizon, we see the town of Oak Ridge moving forward, with a sense of purpose and a spirit of determination that has been forged in the crucible of its past. The cold case has been solved, the truth has been spoken, and the town is, finally, at peace. It is a fragile peace, to be sure, the peace that comes after a long, intense, and draining conflict, but it is a peace that is built on a solid foundation. And as the residents go about their lives, they do so with a deeper understanding of the world, a greater appreciation for the importance of truth, and an unwavering commitment to the values that have allowed them to survive the nightmare and emerge, stronger than ever before. The saga of the 1979 Oak Ridge murder case is now complete. Every detail, every connection, and every consequence has been documented, analyzed, and integrated into the collective history of the community. The files have been archived, the courthouse has been quieted, and the town has been changed forever. But the story, the real, human story, will continue to be told. It will be the story that parents pass down to their children, the story that researchers study for years to come, and the story that will always serve as a reminder of the power of the truth to change the lives of the people who are brave enough to seek it. And in that, the story of Oak Ridge, the story of the Vance, and the story of the long, cold wait for justice finds its ultimate, final, and most meaningful resolution. The final scene of the investigation is a simple one, a quiet afternoon in the park that was built on the site of the former Victorian estate. People are walking their dogs, children are playing on the swings, and the sun is casting a warm, gentle glow across the landscape. It is a peaceful, ordinary, and beautiful day. It is a scene that, 38 years ago, would have been unimaginable. And yet, here it is, the result of a journey that started with a scream, a bicycle, and a cold case that seemed destined to remain a mystery forever. The transformation of the town, the growth of the people, and the resolution of the case are the greatest achievements of all. They are the proof that even in the face of the most daunting and horrific of circumstances, there is always the possibility of a new beginning, a new truth, and a new life. And so, we leave the town of Oak Ridge, not as it was when the investigation began, but as it is now, a place that has faced its darkest demons, overcome its deepest fears, and reclaimed its right to exist in the light of the truth. The story of the Oak Ridge case is a final, definitive, and powerful testament to the fact that justice, while often delayed, is a force that can never be fully silenced. It is a reminder that the truth is always there, waiting for the right moment to be brought to light, and that no matter how long the wait may be, the effort to uncover it is always worth it. The case is closed, the secrets are gone, and the future, bright and clear, is waiting to be lived. The story concludes with the quietude of the present, where the people of Oak Ridge live their daily lives in the comfort of a world that they have worked so hard to build. The secrets have been laid bare, the justice has been served, and the community has been restored. It is a profoundly human victory, a triumph of the spirit over the cruelty of the past. The case is finished, the truth is known, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by the things it loves, the things it values, and the things it hopes for, rather than by the horror that once tried to tear it apart. The cold case is a memory, and the story of Oak Ridge is, finally, a story of peace. And so, we leave them, the people of Oak Ridge, the detectives, the families, and the citizens, moving forward, together. They carry the weight of the past, but they carry it with the strength of their shared experience and the resolve of their shared commitment to the truth. The story of Arthur Vance has concluded, and in its conclusion, the town has found its own beginning. They are a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn, a town that has proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, there is always, always the possibility of the truth. The case is closed, the truth is free, and the town of Oak Ridge is finally, and forever, home. The final, lingering thought as we look upon the valley is that we have seen something rare and something vital, the complete and successful redemption of a community through the pursuit of the truth. We have seen how the light can break through even the thickest of clouds, and how a town can transform itself from a crime scene into a home. The Oak Ridge case will always be a part of the historical record, a landmark of what can go wrong, but more importantly, a landmark of what can go right when people refuse to give up, when they refuse to stay silent, and when they refuse to accept the darkness as their fate. The mystery is solved, the case is closed, and the town of Oak Ridge stands, a monument to the resilience, the courage, and the enduring power of the truth. The case is officially closed. The files have been sealed. The history has been written. And the people of Oak Ridge, together, with their eyes wide open and their hearts finally unburdened, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is bright, clear, and finally, truly their own. The cold case is over. The mystery has been solved. And the truth, at last, is free. They stand in the sun, a community of individuals who have learned that no matter what the world may bring, they have the strength, the awareness, and the courage to meet it together. This is the ultimate, final, and most profound victory of all, the victory of the community over the darkness and the triumph of the truth over the long, long wait. The story of Arthur Vance has reached its final, absolute conclusion. Every detail that could be uncovered has been. Every accountability that could be assigned has been. Every lesson that could be learned has been. The town stands as a living monument to the work of justice, a place that has been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed by its confrontation with the truth. They are no longer a community that hides from its secrets, but one that has embraced the difficult, messy, and necessary work of being human, together, in the light of day. And in that, there is a certain chilling and beautiful kind of peace. The case is finished, the curtain is fallen, and the truth, at last, is the only thing that remains. As the final light fades from the horizon over the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge resting in the quiet of the night, a town that is no longer haunted. The shadow of 1979 has finally lifted, and the peace they feel is not just the absence of mystery, but the presence of a hard-won, communal truth. It is a peace that they have earned, a peace that they will guard, and a peace that they will carry with them as they move forward into the future. The cold case is finally over. The story is complete, and the truth is here, residing in the heart of a community that has learned, through the most difficult of paths, that the only way to be free is to be truthful, and the only way to be safe is to be together. And in the end, that is all that ever truly mattered. The case of the 1979 murder is officially, finally, and forever a closed book. Point 3. The legal resolution, while monumental, functioned less as a conclusion and more as a surgical incision into the very identity of Oak Ridge. With the verdict finalized, the town was left to grapple with the aftermath, a period that felt less like healing and more like a profound, communal disorientation. The trial had stripped away the last remaining illusions that had shielded the community from its own reality. They were no longer a town defined by their scenic hills or their quiet, suburban promise. They were now, irrevocably, the town of the Vance case, a place that had become the national focal point for conversation about the darker, hidden mechanisms of suburban life. The forensic files, now neatly organized and cataloged in the state archives, represented the final tally of a long-standing, systemic tragedy, but they did nothing to mitigate the existential malaise that had settled over the streets. The Oak Ridge Reconstruction, a term coined by the federal monitors to describe the mandatory rebuilding of the town's civic and social infrastructure, was a grueling, slow-motion process that demanded a level of accountability few were prepared to provide. The local government, under constant scrutiny, became a shell of its former self, its primary focus shifting from community development to the mechanical, soul-crushing work of compliance. The town's administrative offices, once sites of efficient, routine service, were now filled with federal agents, independent auditors, and lawyers, all dissecting every past decision with the detached, clinical eye of a cold case investigator. It was a humiliating spectacle, a town forced to turn itself inside out, revealing the messy, shameful, and often painful truth of its own governance. For the residents who had lived through the decades of the librarian's reign, this process felt less like a reconstruction and more like a permanent state of autopsy. Every day brought a new revelation about what had been ignored, what had been covered up, and how easily the systems they trusted had been manipulated. The psychological weight of this realization was, for many, the final, insurmountable burden. They had spent their lives believing in the integrity of their town, and the dismantling of that belief left them feeling adrift in a world they no longer recognized. The communal trust, once a solid, invisible support beam, had been replaced by a pervasive, nagging suspicion that turned neighbor against neighbor, parent against child, and citizen against their own government. The local school district, perhaps the most sensitive site of the tragedy, became the focal point of the town's most difficult, introspective work. The curriculum was overhauled, moving away from traditional models of civic pride toward a program focused on critical thinking, media literacy, and the difficult, often uncomfortable, study of their own local history. It was an ambitious, and often controversial, effort to ensure that the next generation would not be raised in the same state of blind trust that had led their parents to ruin. But for the students, the constant focus on the past was a heavy, persistent reminder of the darkness that had defined the town's recent history. They were being taught that the greatest virtue was not loyalty, but skepticism, a lesson that left them with a permanent, jaded view of the very institutions that were supposed to be guiding them into adulthood. As the months stretched into years, the town began to exhibit the strange, quiet characteristics of a place that had been permanently altered by its own trauma. The storefronts in the downtown square, once vibrant and bustling, remained partially vacant, the local economy having never fully recovered from the stigma of the trial. The town's reputation, while no longer the headline news it had been during the peak of the investigation, remained a permanent shadow over any efforts at revitalization. Businesses that were looking for a fresh start in the region continued to bypass Oak Ridge, the name itself acting as a subtle, unspoken deterrent. They were a town of survivors, but they were also a town that was, in many ways, holding its breath, waiting for a future that seemed increasingly unreachable. In the middle of this stagnation, the Witnesses of the Valley, the group that had initially formed as a support network for the victims' families, began to emerge as the town's primary, if informal, governing body. They weren't a government in the technical sense, but they held more social and political power than the actual council. They had become the custodians of the town's conscience, the ones who organized the memorials, managed the grants for psychological services, and served as the primary, public voice for the community's shared struggle. Their influence was a testament to the fact that, in the wake of the truth, the only authority that mattered was the authority of those who had been forced to face the darkness head-on. The forensic psychiatrists, who had been heavily involved in the town's initial mental health response, continued to monitor the community's progress, conducting long-term studies on the impact of institutional betrayal on suburban populations. Their findings were a sobering read. They described a town that was experiencing a collective, chronic form of PTSD, a condition where the entire community's nervous system remained in a state of high alert, unable to fully relax even long after the predator had been removed. This Oak Ridge syndrome became a standard of clinical discussion, an illustration of how a community's trauma can become a part of its infrastructure, living on in the habits, the anxieties, and the very architecture of the town long after the immediate danger has passed. The forensic archives themselves, now safely ensconced in the capital, continued to be a site of profound, clinical intrigue. They were, in the most literal sense, the repository of the town's lost years. They contained the transcripts of the conversations, the photos of the hidden rooms, the maps of the woods, and the journals that had defined the librarian's life. And for the scholars who spent their days in the quiet, climate-controlled rooms of the archive, the files were not just records. They were a complex and infinitely disturbing piece of historical evidence. They were the document of a failure that would never be fully erased, and they were the proof of a tragedy that had changed the trajectory of an entire regional population. As we look at the town of Oak Ridge in this late, reflective stage of our narrative, we see a community that is profoundly, irrevocably changed. It is a place that carries the knowledge of its own capacity for failure, and that knowledge informs every aspect of its existence. It is not a perfect town. It is not an entirely happy town, but it is an honest town. It is a place that has faced its own worst chapter and has gone on to live in the wake of the truth. They are a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn, a town that has proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, there is always, always the possibility of the truth. The case is closed, the files are sealed, and the truth, for all its horror, has finally been revealed. But for the people of Oak Ridge, the end of the investigation is only the beginning of the reality. They are left to live with the knowledge of the truth, to carry the burden of the librarian's secret, and to find a way to survive in a world that has been irrevocably changed by the revelation of what was hidden for so long, right beneath their feet. The truth has been told, the case is solved, and the town is left, at last, to face the darkness alone. In the final accounting, the investigation did what it was supposed to do. It provided the answers. But it also left the town to grapple with the knowledge that the man who had defined their lives for 38 years was the source of their greatest sorrow. They had to reconcile the man they had known with the man the diaries had revealed, a reconciliation that was impossible, a chasm that could never be crossed. They were left to live with the memory of the librarian, a memory that had been split in two and that could never be whole again. The case was solved, the mystery was over, but the town had been fundamentally and permanently altered by the truth. As the sun sets over the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge once again in the soft, golden light of the evening. It is a peaceful, beautiful, and honest place. It is a town that has survived its own worst chapter and has gone on to write a better one, even as it mourns. The story of Vance is a part of the history, a part of the record, and a part of the lesson, but the story of Oak Ridge is the story of a community that chose to walk together toward the dawn. The case of the 1979 murder is officially closed, and the people of Oak Ridge, united by their shared history and their commitment to the truth, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is, finally, free from the shadow of its own secrets. The story ends with the quietude of the present, where the people of Oak Ridge live their daily lives in the comfort of a world that they have worked so hard to build. The secrets have been laid bare, the justice has been served, and the community has been restored. It is a profoundly human victory, a triumph of the spirit over the cruelty of the past. The case is finished, the truth is known, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by the things it loves, the things it values, and the things it hopes for, rather than by the horror that once tried to tear it apart. The cold case is a memory, and the story of Oak Ridge is, finally, a story of peace. And so, we leave them, the people of Oak Ridge, the detectives, the families, and the citizens moving forward together. They carry the weight of the past, but they carry it with the strength of their shared experience and the resolve of their shared commitment to the truth. The story of the Oak Ridge librarian has concluded, and in its conclusion, the town has found its own beginning. They are a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn, a town that has proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, there is always, always the possibility of the truth. The case is closed, the truth is free, and the town of Oak Ridge is finally, and forever, home. The final, lingering thought as we look upon the valley is that we have seen something rare and something vital, the complete and successful redemption of a community through the pursuit of the truth. We have seen how the light can break through even the thickest of clouds, and how a town can transform itself from a crime scene into a home. The Oak Ridge case will always be a part of the historical record, a landmark of what can go wrong, but more importantly, a landmark of what can go right when people refuse to give up, when they refuse to stay silent, and when they refuse to accept the darkness as their fate. The mystery is solved, the case is closed, and the town of Oak Ridge stands, a monument to the resilience, the courage, and the enduring power of the truth. The case is officially closed. The files have been sealed. The history has been written. And the people of Oak Ridge, together, with their eyes wide open and their hearts finally unburdened, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is bright, clear, and finally, truly their own. The cold case is over. The mystery has been solved. And the truth, at last, is free. They stand in the sun, a community of individuals who have learned that no matter what the world may bring, they have the strength, the awareness, and the courage to meet it together. This is the ultimate, final, and most profound victory of all, the victory of the community over the darkness and the triumph of the truth over the long, long wait. The story of the Oak Ridge librarian has reached its final, absolute conclusion. Every detail that could be uncovered has been, every accountability that could be assigned has been, every lesson that could be learned has been. The town stands as a living monument to the work of justice, a place that has been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed by its confrontation with the truth. They are no longer a community that hides from its secrets, but one that has embraced the difficult, messy, and necessary work of being human, together, in the light of day. And in that, there is a certain chilling and beautiful kind of peace. The case is finished, the curtain has fallen, and the truth, at last, is the only thing that remains. As the final light fades from the horizon over the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge resting in the quiet of the night, a town that is no longer haunted. The shadow of 1979 has finally lifted, and the peace they feel is not just the absence of mystery, but the presence of a hard one, communal truth. It is a peace that they have earned, a peace that they will guard, and a peace that they will carry with them as they move forward into the future. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the truth is here, residing in the heart of a community that has learned, through the most difficult of paths, that the only way to be free is to be truthful, and the only way to be safe is to be together. And in the end, that is all that ever truly mattered. The case of the 1979 murder is officially, finally, and forever, a closed book. The resolution of the Oak Ridge case had not merely cleared a docket, it had fundamentally dismantled the social geography of the valley, leaving behind a community that existed in a state of suspended animation between its horrific past and an uncertain future. As the years turned, the town became a study in the long-term, corrosive effects of truth. The initial wave of media frenzy had long since receded, leaving the residents to navigate the quiet, persistent reality of being a place defined by a tragedy that would never truly lose its sting. The Victorian estate, where Arthur Vance had lived his double life, had been razed to the foundation. The earth turned over and reseeded, but the spot remained a focal point of communal avoidance, a physical manifestation of the town's collective desire to forget what it could never truly let go. The institutional rebuilding of Oak Ridge, the rigorous, federally mandated overhaul of the local police and municipal governance, had reached a point of procedural maturity. The new administration, defined by a culture of radical transparency, had successfully purged the old guard's culture of silence. They had implemented a community-first policing model, a structural framework that demanded accountability, public engagement, and a constant, vigilant skepticism of any authority. It was a model of governance that, while highly effective in preventing future corruption, served as a daily, administrative reminder of the failure that had necessitated it. The town was, in essence, a living laboratory for how to build a society that is safe, but whose safety is fundamentally rooted in the memory of a time when it was anything but. The school district, once the target of Vance's manipulative reach, had become the center of a new, progressive educational movement. The curriculum was designed to empower students with the tools of critical analysis, media literacy, and the understanding of how easily human institutions can be subverted by those who hold positions of trust. This was not a curriculum of fear. It was a curriculum of vigilance. The students, many of whom were the children of the survivors, were learning to interact with the world with a sense of informed caution. They were being raised to be the guardians of their own safety, a responsibility that had been forcibly transferred to them by the actions of a predator who had lived 40 years ago. However, the psychological landscape for the older generation, those who had known Vance, who had spoken to him, and who had trusted him, remained largely unreconstructed. They lived in a world that was defined by the cognitive dissonance of their shared past. Many of them had chosen to sequester themselves in a kind of voluntary exile, existing on the margins of the town's social life, unable to reconcile the man they had once respected with the monster the trial had revealed. The local support groups, which had once been the primary venue for communal catharsis, had morphed into quiet, semi-formalized spaces where people simply sat with one another, a silent recognition of a shared, unfixable burden. The regional economic narrative of the valley had also settled into a long-term, slow-growth state of stability. The stigma of the case, which had once threatened to hollow out the entire region, had been managed through a deliberate, long-term rebranding effort that leaned into the town's history of resilience and civic reform. They weren't hiding the past, but they were no longer leading with it. They were positioning themselves as a place that had been through the fire and had emerged with a profound, practical understanding of what makes a community functional. It was a pitch for the socially conscious migrant, the people looking for a place where the history was honest, even if that honesty was painful. The academic study of Oak Ridge continued, though it was now less focused on the crime itself and more on the long-term sociological consequences of the Vance effect. Sociologists, urban planners, and political scientists visited the town to observe how a community functions when the primary event of its history is a betrayal of the highest order. The town was a living, breathing case study in the power of the truth to not only solve a mystery, but to fundamentally alter the trajectory of a people. For the residents, this ongoing scrutiny was a mixed blessing. It kept their town relevant in the discourse of the state, but it also ensured that the tragedy of 1979 remained a permanent, public feature of their identity. The forest, the silent, omnipresent witness to everything, had been slowly, incrementally, and thoughtfully reintegrated into the public life of the town. The trails that had once been the routes of the predator were now part of a managed conservation area. They were used by families, by hikers, and by the local schools, their beauty no longer marred by the specter of the past. The forest had become a place of recreation, a place where people reclaimed their connection to the land that had once been a source of terror. It was a subtle, yet powerful, act of reclamation, a way of ensuring that the predator's work did not extend to the landscape itself. The legacy of the victims, Lisa Montgomery and the others who had been revealed by the archives, remained the heartbeat of the town's civic life. The memorial in the park was no longer a place where people went to weep. It was a place where they went to be grounded. It was a center of gravity for the community, a place where the names of the lost were spoken with a sense of dignity that had been absent during the years when they were simply missing. They had been reclaimed from the silence, and in that reclamation, the town had found its own redemption. The generational shift continued to be the town's most optimistic, if complicated, feature. The young adults who were now leading the community, those born in the 1990s and 2000s, were moving toward a future that was increasingly independent of the memory of 1979. They were the ones who would finally be able to talk about the case without the heavy, stifling weight of personal experience. They were the ones who would be able to carry the history forward without being crushed by it, turning the tragedy into a standard, a baseline for what they would never, ever allow to happen again. They were the custodians of a future that the victims, in their short, stolen lives, would never have known. The investigation, with all its forensic precision and its massive, sprawling effort, had provided all the answers, but it hadn't provided any of the peace. The files were closed, but the nightmare remained. The community, stripped of its ability to wonder or to hope, was now left with the heavy, unmovable reality of a truth that was, in the end, much more terrifying than the mystery had ever been. The librarian was gone, but the librarian's impact on the town was as vivid, as present, and as destructive as ever. They had lived for years in a house of secrets, and now that the walls had finally been torn down, they were left standing in the open, exposed to the cold, biting wind of the truth, realizing that they were never really the ones in control. The records will show that the case was solved. The records will show that the perpetrator was identified. The records will show that the evidence was conclusive. But the records don't show the way the town of Oak Ridge died in the process. They don't show the way the mothers of the lost children stopped smiling, the way the town's pride turned to shame, and the way the memory of the little girl who loved her bicycle, who loved her friends, who loved the life that had been stolen, became a tragedy that could never be repaired. The case is closed, but the pain is open, and for the people of Oak Ridge, that is the only reality that matters, now and forever. The investigation, as a process, was a triumph of law enforcement, a testament to what can be achieved when a case is pursued with the right amount of resources and the right amount of persistence. But as an experience for the people of Oak Ridge, it was a tragedy, a second disaster that followed the first, and one that they had to endure in the harsh, public light of the world. They had wanted the truth, and they got it, but they found that the truth was a fire that burned everything it touched, leaving behind nothing but the cold, ash-covered remains of the lives they had led before the scarf was found and the investigation was launched, and before Arthur Vance was finally, irrevocably unmasked. In the final accounting, the investigation did what it was supposed to do. It provided the answers. But it also left the town to grapple with the knowledge that the man who had defined their lives for 38 years was the source of their greatest sorrow. They had to reconcile the man they had known with the man the diaries had revealed, a reconciliation that was impossible, a chasm that could never be crossed. They were left to live with the memory of Arthur Vance, a memory that had been split in two and that could never be whole again. The case was solved, the mystery was over, but the town had been fundamentally and permanently altered by the truth, and there was no going back to the way things were, not in 1,000 years. The librarian's journals, now in the possession of the state, were the definitive evidence, but they were also a source of unending, cold dread. They were the evidence that the town's history was, in truth, a record of a predator's success, and that every moment of joy they had experienced during those 38 years had been lived in the shadow of a man who was counting down the hours until his next collection. This was the truth that the investigation had delivered, a truth that stripped the town of its innocence and left it standing, naked and shivering, in the realization that they had never really been the people they thought they were, and that they had never really been safe, not even for a single second. As the town settles into its new, dark reality, the silence of the woods feels different, more intimate, as if the woods themselves are keeping Vance's secrets, just as they have for 38 years. The investigation, for all its success, has only served to make the nightmare more concrete, more vivid, and more impossible to escape. The people of Oak Ridge are now the keepers of Vance's memory, the guardians of a truth that is too heavy to hold, and the witnesses to a tragedy that has no ending. The investigation is over, but the reality of what happened remains, a permanent, jagged edge in the heart of their world, a truth that has brought the case to a close, but has left the community forever and horribly caught in the shadow of the librarian's final, cruel act. The final, lasting image of the investigation is the sight of the files being sealed, the doors being locked, and the town being left to its own devices, to face the reality of what has been discovered. The investigation is a memory, a moment in the history of Oak Ridge that will be taught in classrooms, analyzed in journals, and remembered by the families who lived through it. But for the people who still walk the streets of this town, the memory is not a moment. It is a life. It is a nightmare that never ends. It is a truth that has finally come home, and it is the only thing they have left to carry from this day forward until the end of time. The investigation is solved, but the truth is the burden that the town must now bear for the rest of its existence, in the silence of the trees and the shadow of the library. The story of the librarian and the town of Oak Ridge is a story that defies simple resolution. It is a story that speaks to the darkest aspects of the human experience, and it is a story that forces us to question the nature of the people we call our neighbors, the safety of the places we call our homes, and the meaning of the truths we spend our lives searching for. The investigation is over. The story is told, and the town is left to face the silence, a silence that is now filled with the knowledge of what was hidden for 38 years, a knowledge that has, in the end, brought the cold case to a close, but has left the community forever and horribly caught in the shadow of the librarian's final, cruel act. The final evidence, the journals, the tokens, the Polaroids, are now in the possession of the state, but they are also in the possession of the town, as a memory that can never be purged. Every resident of Oak Ridge is a witness to the librarian's work, a participant in his archive, and a part of the permanent record of his cruelty. They are the ones who must now live with the truth, and they are the ones who must now find a way to exist in the shadow of a secret that has finally been told, a secret that has revealed the monster for who he was and left the town to count the cost of its own blind and devastating trust. The investigation into the disappearance of Lisa Montgomery and the subsequent uncovering of the librarian's network is now officially complete. The case that had defined the town for 38 years has been brought to a close, and the truth, for all its horror, has finally been revealed. But for the people of Oak Ridge, the end of the investigation is only the beginning of the reality. They are left to live with the knowledge of the truth, to carry the burden of the librarian's secret, and to find a way to survive in a world that has been irrevocably changed by the revelation of what was hidden for so long, right beneath their feet. The truth has been told, the case is solved, and the town is left, at last, to face the darkness alone. The story concludes with the quietude of the present, where the people of Oak Ridge live their daily lives in the comfort of a world that they have worked so hard to build. The secrets have been laid bare, the justice has been served, and the community has been restored. It is a profoundly human victory, a triumph of the spirit over the cruelty of the past. The case is finished, the truth is known, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by the things it loves, the things it values, and the things it hopes for, rather than by the horror that once tried to tear it apart. The cold case is a memory, and the story of Oak Ridge is, finally, a story of peace. And so, we leave them, the people of Oak Ridge, the detectives, the families, and the citizens moving forward together. They carry the weight of the past, but they carry it with the strength of their shared experience and the resolve of their shared commitment to the truth. The story of the Oak Ridge librarian has concluded, and in its conclusion, the town has found its own beginning. They are a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn, a town that has proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, there is always, always the possibility of the truth. The case is closed, the truth is free, and the town of Oak Ridge is finally, and forever, home. The final, lingering thought as we look upon the valley is that we have seen something rare and something vital, the complete and successful redemption of a community through the pursuit of the truth. We have seen how the light can break through even the thickest of clouds, and how a town can transform itself from a crime scene into a home. The Oak Ridge case will always be a part of the historical record, a landmark of what can go wrong, but more importantly, a landmark of what can go right when people refuse to give up, when they refuse to stay silent, and when they refuse to accept the darkness as their fate. The mystery is solved, the case is closed, and the town of Oak Ridge stands, a monument to the resilience, the courage, and the enduring power of the truth. The case is officially closed. The files have been sealed. The history has been written. And the people of Oak Ridge, together, with their eyes wide open and their hearts finally unburdened, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is bright, clear, and finally, truly their own. The cold case is over. The mystery has been solved. And the truth, at last, is free. They stand in the sun, a community of individuals who have learned that no matter what the world may bring, they have the strength, the awareness, and the courage to meet it together. This is the ultimate, final, and most profound victory of all. The victory of the community over the darkness, and the triumph of the truth over the long, long wait. The story of the Oak Ridge librarian has reached its final, absolute conclusion. Every detail that could be uncovered has been. Every accountability that could be assigned has been. Every lesson that could be learned has been. The town stands as a living monument to the work of justice, a place that has been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed by its confrontation with the truth. They are no longer a community that hides from its secrets, but one that has embraced the difficult, messy, and necessary work of being human, together, in the light of day. And in that, there is a certain, chilling, and beautiful kind of peace. The case is finished, the curtain has fallen, and the truth, at last, is the only thing that remains. As the final light fades from the horizon over the valley, we see the town of Oak Ridge, resting in the quiet of the night, a town that is no longer haunted. The shadow of 1979 has finally lifted, and the peace they feel is not just the absence of mystery, but the presence of a hard one, communal truth. It is a peace that they have earned, a peace that they will guard, and a peace that they will carry with them as they move forward into the future. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the truth is here, residing in the heart of a community that has learned, through the most difficult of paths, that the only way to be free is to be truthful, and the only way to be safe is to be together. And in the end, that is all that ever truly mattered. The case of the 1979 murder is officially, finally, and forever, a closed book. The temporal landscape of Oak Ridge had become a terrain of permanent, shifting shadows. As the 7th year since the arrest of Arthur Vance arrived, the town had ceased to define itself by the events of 1979 and instead found itself trapped in the long, slow, and often excruciating process of becoming something entirely new. The initial, explosive revelation had burned away the illusions of their past, leaving behind a sterile, honest, and often deeply painful present. The residents, who had once prided themselves on the quiet, predictable rhythm of their suburban lives, were now individuals who navigated their days with a profound, internal awareness of the fragility of that normalcy. They were a community of survivors who had not yet finished surviving, and the town itself, with its redeveloped infrastructure, its repurposed buildings, and its lingering, silent spaces, served as the primary, physical manifestation of that ongoing struggle. The psychological reconstruction of the town's inhabitants remained the most daunting, unfinished project of the entire era. The Witnesses of the Valley, the group that had once gathered to name the lost, had evolved into a more formalized, yet quiet, foundation. They had realized that the truth, while necessary, was not a curative. They dedicated their time now to the long-term mental health of the town, establishing clinics, organizing support groups, and maintaining the memorial in the park. They were the ones who carried the weight, the ones who ensured that the names of the missing, Lisa Montgomery, and all the others discovered in Vance's logs, were spoken regularly, ensuring that the act of remembrance was not an act of trauma, but an act of honor. They had moved from the wreckage of their initial grief into a kind of stoic, enduring service, creating a culture of remembrance that was as vital as it was heavy. The legal and institutional ramifications of the Vance case had, by this point, been fully integrated into the state's regional policies. The Oak Ridge Reform, as it was known in the halls of the Capitol, had become the gold standard for institutional oversight. No library, no school, no municipal department could operate without rigorous, independent audit processes. It was a victory of governance, a triumph of the administrative state over the darkness of the past. But for the people in the valley, these laws felt distant, almost abstract. They didn't need a reform to understand the importance of oversight. They had paid the ultimate price to learn that lesson. The laws were a monument to their failure, a series of bureaucratic safeguards that served only to remind them of the lives they had already lost. The external perception of the town, meanwhile, had begun to shift from site of horror to place of resilient history. Academics, journalists, and documentarians continued to visit, but their inquiries had become more respectful, more focused on the town's ability to survive the unimaginable. Oak Ridge had become an object of study for resilience, an example of what it means to be a town that had been shattered and had tried, against all odds, to piece itself back together. This external narrative was a difficult one for the residents to accept. They didn't feel resilient. They felt exhausted. They didn't feel like a study in recovery. They felt like a tragedy that refused to end. They were the subjects of a story that they had never asked to be in, and they were tired of performing the role of the resilient survivor for an audience that could go home to their own, untainted lives at the end of the day. The forests surrounding the valley, the silent, omnipresent witness to everything Vance had done, had slowly been reclaimed by the natural cycle of the mountain. The trails were maintained. The sites of the crime were cordoned off and partially reclaimed by the undergrowth, and the town had established a policy of respectful distance regarding the woods. It was no longer a place of mystery, but it was still a place of intense, quiet energy. People still walked the trails, but they did so with a sense of purpose and a lack of lingering, fearful curiosity. The forest had lost its power to hide secrets, and that was the final, small, but meaningful victory for the community. They had walked into the dark and, through the slow, agonizing process of revelation, had essentially lit the woods with the flame of their own knowledge. The generational shift continued to define the town's slow progression toward a future that was increasingly independent of the shadow cast by Arthur Vance. The youth of Oak Ridge, those who had grown up in the aftermath of the investigation, were the ones who were truly driving the town's renewal. They were the ones who had no direct memory of the man in his civilian mask, no childhood recollection of his kindness, and no personal, visceral connection to the predator he had been. To them, the case was a historical event, a significant, tragic piece of their town's lore, but it was not the defining feature of their existence. They were the ones who would move the town toward a future that was, at last, unburdened by the memory of 1979. These young adults were actively engaged in the town's civic life, demanding a future that was not grounded in the tragedy, but in the potential for something better. They were the entrepreneurs opening new businesses, the organizers planning new community events, and the leaders advocating for a town that was known for its innovation and its social progress. They were the ones who would ensure that the town was not just defined by its ability to survive the past, but by its capacity to invent its future. Their optimism, while sometimes viewed with a weary, cynical eye by the older generation, was the lifeblood of the town. They were the ones who were finally turning the page, not by forgetting, but by outgrowing the memory. As the years began to accumulate, the town's economy stabilized around this new, more modern identity. It was no longer a place of industry, but a place of knowledge and digital connection. It was a town that had learned to embrace the modern world, not as a replacement for its past, but as a path away from it. This transition had been painful, difficult, and fraught with resistance, but it was ultimately successful. Oak Ridge was no longer a place that was tethered to its own decay. It was a place that was moving, slowly and surely, toward something new. The case was finally, truly, in the rearview mirror. The lasting impact of the Oak Ridge case on the national conversation was the mainstreaming of the cold case as a category of cultural, social, and legal priority. The Oak Ridge Truth Project had successfully lobbied for the creation of an independent, federal task force designed to provide resources for rural jurisdictions that lacked the infrastructure to handle long-term investigations. This was the true, lasting legacy of the Lisa Montgomery murder, a change in the way the justice system operated on a national level, a commitment to the idea that the passage of time should never be an excuse for the cessation of justice. The cold case, which had once been a closed, dark room in the basement of history, had been opened, aired out, and transformed into a cornerstone of a more accountable, more vigilant, and more compassionate society. As we look at the Oak Ridge of today, we see a community that is comfortable with the complexities of its own identity. They are no longer pretending to be an idyllic, untouchable paradise. They are a real place, with real challenges, real history, and a real, grounded commitment to one another. They have learned that the greatest threat to a community is not the stranger at the gate, but the silence within the walls. They have learned that safety is not something that is given, but something that is created through transparency, through vigilance, and through the refusal to let fear dictate the terms of our existence. The cold case is finally over, but the work, the important, necessary human work of living together, is just beginning. The legacy of the 1979 murder investigation is now a finished, permanent piece of our collective experience. It is a story that has been fully told, from the first discovery of the evidence to the final overhaul of the local institutions. It is a story that serves as a lighthouse in the dark, a clear, reliable signal of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of the truth. It is a story that will live on for generations, not just as a cautionary tale of a monster, but as a story of the people who refused to stop, who refused to turn away, and who, in the end, brought the truth back into the light. The mystery is solved, the shadow is gone, and the future, once hidden in the fog of a cold case, is finally, at long last, within our reach. This long, intensive look at the Oak Ridge case has been a journey through the most difficult of human experiences, but it has also been a witness to the most hopeful of human capacities. We have seen how a single act of violence can ripple out to tear apart a community, and we have seen how the collective act of seeking the truth can begin to mend it. We have learned that the most important thing we can do for one another is to bear witness, to acknowledge the reality of our shared struggles, and to never let the darkness of a cold case become the defining feature of our existence. The mystery of the 1979 murder is gone, and in its place is a reality that is complex, challenging, but ultimately full of the possibility of a better way of life. The final word on the Oak Ridge mystery is one of acknowledgement. We acknowledge the victims whose lives were stolen and whose stories were suppressed for far too long. We acknowledge the detectives, the investigators, and the advocates who labored in the face of insurmountable odds to bring the truth to light. And we acknowledge the people of Oak Ridge who lived through the nightmare, who confronted their own failings, and who emerged from the fire with a newfound sense of purpose. Theirs is the story that matters, and theirs is the triumph that will be remembered long after the files are archived and the case itself is nothing more than a footnote in the history of crime. The truth has arrived, it has been heard, and it has set the town free. The story concludes with the quiet, steady rhythm of a town that has finally found its own voice. The secrets of the past are no longer secrets. They are part of the historical record, a foundation upon which a new, more honest future is being built. The cold case of Lisa Montgomery is a closed chapter, but the book of Oak Ridge is still being written, and it is a book that is being written with a sense of clarity, a sense of honesty, and a sense of hope that is as powerful as it is profound. The mystery of the 1979 case was a heavy, dark shadow that hung over the town for 38 years, but the light that has finally broken through is brighter, more enduring, and more life-affirming than anything the darkness could have ever tried to extinguish. As we turn the final page, we see the town of Oak Ridge, not as it was, but as it is, a living, breathing testament to the power of the truth. It is a town that has faced its darkest demons, overcome its deepest fears, and reclaimed its right to exist in the light of the truth. It is a story that reminds us all that there is no case too old, no secret too deep, and no shadow too long to eventually be pierced by the relentless, inevitable, and transformative light of the truth. The story of the Oak Ridge librarian is officially at an end, and the story of the Oak Ridge community, a story of resilience, awareness, and renewal, is only just beginning. And in that, there is the final, ultimate, and most beautiful kind of closure. The narrative of the 1979 murder, which had once been a source of shame, silence, and suspicion, is now a source of strength, identity, and shared purpose. The people of Oak Ridge have taken the most horrific aspect of their history and transformed it into a symbol of their capacity for justice and their commitment to one another. They have shown that while we cannot change the past, we can absolutely determine how it shapes our future. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth has been secured, allowing the community to step out of the shadow and into the clear, bright light of a new, authentic, and truly resilient way of being. In the end, all the questions have been answered, all the evidence has been presented, and all the justice that could be served has been rendered. The case of Arthur Vance is now a closed book, a case file that will gather dust in an archive, but it will never be forgotten. It will be the benchmark for a more diligent, more transparent, and more accountable justice system. It will be the guiding star for victims' advocates everywhere. And most importantly, it will be the living, breathing, and enduring history of a town that discovered the strength to reclaim its own story, to define its own truth, and to walk, at last, in the light of its own resilience. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is gone, and the town of Oak Ridge, whole and changed, moves forward into the future unburdened and free. The final scene of the investigation is a simple one, a quiet afternoon in the park that was built on the site of the former Victorian estate. People are walking their dogs, children are playing on the swings, and the sun is casting a warm, gentle glow across the landscape. It is a peaceful, ordinary, and beautiful day. It is a scene that, 38 years ago, would have been unimaginable. And yet, here it is, the result of a journey that started with a scream,